Well, good morning, everybody. Are we all there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Riven,
All
check.
right.
Yep. Good morning.
Excellent. Well, welcome. We're going to get this event kicked off. It's so great to see so many friends here. Welcome to
I'm
our
here.
ASA
Can you hear me?
members. Welcome to the larger community
All
that's
right.
joining us for this very special event. My name is David Doss. I serve as the president of the Academy of Scoring Arts. And in another window here, you'll see Reuven, I believe.
Yep. Morning.
Welcome, Reuven. Reuven is our vice president. And on behalf of the entire board, we want to welcome you to this special event. And the third window you'll see, of course, is Mr. Thomas Goss, our very special guest for today. Thomas, you there? Can you hear us, Thomas?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So a quick just preamble here. If you would like to join in the live chat of our event today, you can click through the link. If you're not watching it on YouTube, if you're watching it embedded on another site like Facebook or our site, if you watch it live on YouTube, you'll have the chat window to the right, and you can chime in. I can already see some of our friends from the community saying hello. So hello to all of you. I know the coronavirus has thrown pretty much the entire world for a loop, and on behalf of everybody, we hope everybody is safe, staying mostly inside and practicing good countermeasures. And I know for many of us, like we're just rethinking a lot of things, like how do we run our lives and how do we take care of those around us. So yeah, we're going to talk more about that today, I'm sure. And because it's nice as we're all in lock-in mode to be able to share in a little bit of this. So I hope that the event today will be a real encouragement to everybody and a help, a practical help in the work that we do. So if you are new to the Academy of Scoring Arts, I just want to say a little bit about who we are, what we do. We've been around for 10 plus years now. We are a community of people that's dedicated to the study of music as it pertains to visual media, because we've seen that, as time has gone on, more and more music finds a lot of connection with the world through its marriage to visual media. So we host score studies, panel discussions, all that kind of stuff, jazz studies, looks at legends of film scores of yesteryear. And we do all of that with a view towards studying what's gone before us so that we can make better music as we go forward. I feel like our profession and our world has morphed to be so visually conscious, particularly the past 10 or 15 years through the rise of visual media, YouTube, Instagram, things like that. And music is such a big part of how all that works. So a lot of our music ends up synced to picture, and it's a modern art form for us. So we were started by a veteran composer, Ron Jones. He was here in LA. You know him from shows like Family Guy and Star Trek and stuff like that. He did a lot of work. He had a very large fan base here in Los Angeles, where we're based. And he just wanted a place where he could hang out and study music with his friends and have some grub. So we've been meeting for 10 plus years. Ron has now retired to the Pacific Northwest, but he's still active and working. So the rest of us on the board have continued his mission. We continue to hold studies. We do Stravinsky, Debussy, John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, Danny Elfman, John Adams. We have guests from the film, game, TV world. We had Chris Bowers to study Green Book. We had Michael Abels to study Us and Get Out, and things like that. We try and put on events on a monthly basis. We have an online membership where you can check out many of the things from our past. I also have a very special announcement I wanted to make today, just in case you are brand new to the Academy of Scoring Arts. In light of the coronavirus and our present lockdowns and quarantines, we're opening up to the community, and we are giving away 6 of our most popular studies from the past. You'll see Gordy Hobb, who scored the Star Wars games, Battlefront, Battlefront 2, and the new one. We did a study of Jurassic Park. We studied Planet of the Apes. We had Jeff Beal from House of Cards here. So 6 of those studies are available free on our website. If you click on the free tab, you'll find it. All you have to do is become a chamber member, which is free, so no big deal, just one page of e-paperwork. And we would love to extend that to you. So when you are shut in or under other unfortunate circumstances, at least there's something you can get better at. And you can study and can occupy your time so that as careers get back into motion and the industries get back into motion, we'll all be well placed. And I wish success on everybody here in the community. So that's my spiel about the ASA. And now I'd like to kind of open the door. Our very special guest, Thomas Goss, you know him from Orchestration Online. He has hyperactive YouTube channel, Patreon channel. He is really one of the preeminent orchestrators of our time, and many of you know him as just a tremendously generous person as he gives to the community and in so many ways. So it goes without saying, please check out his YouTube, subscribe to him, consider supporting him on Patreon. And we have him here live for, I don't remember if it's the third time or so that we've been able to do a collaboration. Thomas is based in New Zealand, but once in a while he makes it to LA, so we have him here for a live event. And we started this little tradition of where we'll throw out a little challenge to our community. So we have some people in our community who have done orchestrations that we're going to talk about later today. But welcome, Thomas. I've been talking a lot, but I want to give you a word here, lots of words. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, it is great to be here. It's an honor to be asked once again to join in. And I really enjoy these challenges. I was looking over the scores today, and there's just so much to say. There's a lot to help people with, and there's also a lot of great talent out there. It's one of the things that I always enjoy. A lot of times people will just think of me as a voice of critique, but I really do get a charge out of seeing everybody's ingenious ideas of how to arrange something. It's really a shame that I had to go home early. There were two other events. There was your event, and there was also a lecture on the following Sunday, and both of those were canceled. And I won't say that I was shattered. I mean, I was really disappointed, but as soon as everything started getting canceled, I basically just booked a plane and flew back to New Zealand, because I didn't really want to. I didn't want to run the risk of having no airplanes left to fly me home. So that is why I'm back here in my office a week later, and it really seems like 2 or 3 weeks. It just seems like the time has passed very slowly, or quickly. Anyhow, since I hopped on that plane. But I'm glad that we were able to do this kind of makeup session, and let's see how it goes. On top of everything else I've been doing, it's really a great way to kind of put things more in perspective.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I can see some lots of things in the chat coming in. It's kind of like we're in the room with you guys. So it's the next best thing. So thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into the Gershwin stuff that we're going to talk about today, you have a new book out, and it's not your first book.
Right.
I'd love to talk a little bit about that, and
Okay.
and just why'd you write it? Where did it come from? And tell us about it.
Well, I started off my Facebook group by posting a tip a day in early 2013. And after about 66 days, I finally sort of put a halt on it, and then really, started writing tips whenever I possibly could, because other things in my career started taking off. And that became 100 orchestration tips, the first book. And this book is sort of the reverse process. I had been writing tips after publishing 100 orchestration tips, just a tip here and a tip there. And I found that I was really going into way more detail, because not so much that I had to defend what I said, but I had to clarify, if you see what I mean. There's always somebody who does something differently, even a professional, right? So 80%, 90% of professionals might have told me that they do things a certain way, and then I might publish that tip on my website or make it into a video for the YouTube channel and get a lot of comments saying, well, I do it this way or that way, or possibly misunderstanding exactly the way that I'm framing the point that I'm making. So the tips in the new book tend to be kind of longer and back up things a little bit more with the logic, not just the perspective of the musicians that are following that particular way of thinking. But it really was a reverse process, as I was saying, just a tip here, a tip there. And I realized that I should really be more serious about this and write another book and bring it all together. So for the past 3 months, I've just been writing 1 or 2 tips a day and illustrating them and fact checking them with different professional musicians and so on, until I could release this book. And I feel that this second book is even more clear. It's got way more examples. I think that the previous book had like 1 or maybe 2 examples per tip. This one has more like 4 to 5. So I really try to illustrate every point that I make in the scoring practice of great composers, or just of things that I've run into in my own scoring.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost feel, because I've been diving into it myself. I feel tips
Right.
is almost it's making it sound like less than it is, because for me, there's tremendous insight. It's
Well,
not
thanks.
an orchestration textbook from A to Z the way we might think of an Adler
Right.
or something like that. But like,
Mhm.
I'm thumbing through it virtually, of course, and I'm seeing like real insights both into the playing and the notation of specific instruments that make me go, oh yeah, I forgot that the clarinet can do that, or I should try this next time. And it's really kind of adding on to knowledge I already had,
Right.
but in profound ways. Like it just makes all my synapses fire that, oh, I can do that. I can do that. There's a lot of really great stuff in it.
Thanks. Yeah. I think one of my favorite parts about the book is that I really wanted to see what was the difference in adding a mute to an instrument, because a lot of people have this idea, oh, mute just makes it quieter, and that's like the beginning of knowledge about mutes and orchestration. But the more profound insight is that mutes filter. It's almost just like a graphic equalizer where you just bring this one down and that one down and so on. So what I decided to do was just record the instruments that use mutes, which is basically brass and strings, and to get the general wave shape of each instrument playing the same note. It's G below middle C, concert G below middle C for all instruments in this book. And to get the general wave shape for each instrument, and then to look at how the mutes take out or add, right? That's something that people don't realize, like that a mute actually adds frequencies. In some cases, like Harmon mutes are just at an amazing spectrum. And the same thing is true for stopping, for concert horns. Is another type of mute, I feel. And what that does is it really boosts the high frequencies. Generally speaking, um, the mutes for horns will tend to have like a wave shape that's sort of like this. So like here's the peak, and then which is like the root and the body of the tone, and then it kind of tapers off. But the but what you get with the with mutes, mostly for horn, are just this pushing up of the frequencies that would have fallen off. So there's a lot of stuff there that you can't even hear, like that maybe your dog or cat could hear. That's part of the frequency spectrum that's being added by a straight mute or by stopping on horn, and of course also by Harmon mutes and straight mutes on the heavy brass instruments. So all of those images are in the book, and I think that it's a great way of sort of looking at it and understanding like what your ears are telling you, right? Sometimes you sort of have to just really write it out and see how it will work, and that, I think that is just a pictorial depiction, that is really effective. Then people might make the right choice on how to combine those instruments in an intelligent way if they haven't really worked with them that much before.
Absolutely. And let me just remind our most recent joiners, if you would like to join in the live chat related to this, feel free to. You can do so just by making sure you're watching this live stream on YouTube. So if you click in the header where it has the title, it'll just pop you over to YouTube where you'll have the chat on the right side. And if you have questions for Thomas or any of us as we go through today, feel free to jump in, and I'll read them out if they're relevant to our discussion. Your thoughts about mutes, like that's really interesting to me, because it's another way of looking at things that we've probably heard many times but we haven't known how to identify. And now,
Right.
by having the knowledge underneath what a mute does to this particular instrument, we can write for it more effectively, and we can generate more colors, more orchestral colors, um,
Right.
as we go on.
Here's one more tip that I'll add that I also discovered by taking the spectrum of different instruments. And that was the spectrum of a marimba versus a xylophone? Why is it that these two instruments that are basically the same in mass, and both made out of wood and both struck with similar beaters, why is it that the xylophone cuts through so cleanly and the marimba gets covered up? Okay, so the answer to that is that the marimba has a very similar spectrum to strings and brass and so on. So basically they combine with those sounds and they just get kind of added to them and overwhelmed by them. So they don't really stick out. They just are part of it. So if you have strings and brass playing along with your marimba and they're playing the same notes, the marimba will disappear. Marimbas really have to be left alone in an orchestral texture, or they have to be intelligently added so that they don't disappear. Okay, well, xylophone, however, has a spectrum that's very, very similar to a clarinet. So the odd numbered partials stick out. So it's almost like the xylophone represents the clarino register of the clarinet. And so, I mean, I'm sure everybody's heard a clarinet solo over an orchestra. It just cuts right through. You can hear it very, very clearly, especially in the higher notes. And that's the same exact principle that's working for the xylophone as well. So that's another tip that I thought. It's actually a pretty small one, but I introduced that one at the book launch, and I thought that was just a really effective, just looking at it, understanding the spectrum, not having to be a spectralist composer necessarily, but just kind of understanding the DNA of the sounds that you're working with, I think just makes your insights about about the textures that you're building a lot, just a lot more intuitive, I feel.
Absolutely. Ruben, feel free to jump in anytime if you got anything. I see some really interesting questions from Ernst. It may be a little off topic for today, but he's asking a couple questions. How would you use harmonic major or its modes in an orchestral epic context? And also how to avoid excessively jarring harmonies. I feel like we could do seminars on those topics alone. And they are more on the composition side of things. Go ahead.
The only thing that I'll say is sort of speaking in terms of what I was talking about before about spectrum. Maybe this will help a little bit, and that is that what we consider to be consonant harmony tends to be those harmonies in which the major, that's a wrong adjective to use, in which the most prominent of the harmonic overtones line up together, right? So if you look at the harmonic spectrum, you've got a jump of an octave from the root, and then you've got a fifth, and then the next octave, and then you've got thirds going up to a minor seventh, and then you've got the octave and so on, and then you've got a scale from there. So things that, major chords, right? Those are things that line up with that spectrum, and they reinforce each other, right? So all of those things are working together. So, and in terms of avoiding jarring harmonies, you could try to be as consonant as possible in your harmony. But I would say that that's just another tool. It's not like a way of life, right? A composer and an orchestrator should always be searching out different techniques and different approaches and modifying them from the works that they are influenced by and finding their own voice, right? So I would say don't avoid things as much as learn why they work the way they do or they don't work the way that they do. And maybe it's a question they're asking that, like, maybe some things that they felt were going to be stronger turned out to be kind of weak and jarring. So I would say just really make sure that the major parts, the most prominent parts of your consonant harmony are supported well, right? So like don't give the major third to an instrument that's really, really weak. And you don't have to overemphasize the dominant note of the chord, right? You don't have to overemphasize the fifth because it's inferred by the overtones, right? So that really just the major third is if you look at a lot of tutti chords, the major third is the strong part of the chord, and the dominant sound, the fifth, is really almost just happenstance. It just is filled in. So you don't have to follow Rimsky-Korsakov's dictum that every single note should be filled in all the way up and down. I actually have a whole video on this, analyzing 2T major chords, and it's really interesting how different composers, even of Rimsky-Korsakov's time, were not obeying his ideas at all. And even he would not really necessarily always do what he said in his principles. But of course, he was writing for students, right? He wanted their first efforts to be strong. So, yeah.
But we all know the principles are made to be broken.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and just to wrap up this segment, there's a really interesting short quote or short note from one of our viewers, Johnny. He says, "It's fun to think of frequency masking in orchestration," which kind of ties together both of these issues.
You know, that is we'll be here for another hour if I even start to talk about that. Yeah, so just to kind of so I don't lose the thread of something that you said before. I'm about to release a video that is going to talk a little bit about our situation. Today's internet savvy artists, people, members of my community and yours, and everybody else out there on the internet who is doing things just to be more creative as artists, or even to do this professionally. And I feel that it's, even though this is a kind of a lean time for composers where everybody is kind of digging in, I think that it's just a really great opportunity if you're forced into isolation like I am actually, that you should spend the time creating or improving your chops, getting more educated. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the major resources out there that people could use, things that I've created, some things that, perhaps some of your resources, it would be good to add to that. And also people like Norman Ludwin and Alan Belkin, and somebody who assisted my work hugely is Brett Newton, who had a website called Bandistration, and he also has books on band orchestration that actually apply really, really well to standard orchestration. So, so I'm just going to recommend to people, there are some resources out there. Some of them are free, some of them are low, that they're going to be low cost. And I may launch a course myself that's really designed to maybe fill in some holes in some training programs that I had soon, but I'm not going to announce it quite yet, but just to let people know that an announcement is coming as soon as I can just really get my description all worked out and all the logistics. But yeah, just so my advice to everybody is, if you feel like you are where you need to be creatively, then go create something. If you feel that you need improvement for the next time around that we're allowed to go outside, then improve yourself. Right? Educate yourself, get your chops going, read some things, read some scores, take some courses, free or maybe, paid online, but not too much. And, just really try to stay involved with your music. Don't just retreat into your shell right now, even if you have to be in your house, because, there's a Beatles lyric, without going out of my house, I can see all the world or something. I think that in itself is also a quote from a mystic, an Indian mystic. And that spiritual imagery is the truth for us today, right? We have got the window to everybody else who is connected. Everybody who's opening that window, we can communicate with them and we can share perspectives and get better. So if there was ever a need for the kinds of online communities that are being created, I think that it's just really right now. So I'm going to try to help as much as I can over the next 2 or 3 months. I'm actually in voluntary self-isolation right now. There was a deadline the night that I came back. I actually came back in the morning, but that evening, anybody who came in after that deadline had to self-isolate for 2 weeks. But I'm doing it anyways, because who knows, right? I don't want to be responsible for getting anybody sick. So there were a lot of people coughing in the airport, a lot of people not washing their hands and everything else. So I just want to be responsible, but it doesn't really matter because I'm a composer, right? I mean, I would be here anyway. It just means maybe, a couple less trips to the supermarket, really, so anyhow, so everybody hang in there. That is my particular message for today. And with that, I think we can do something online educational right now, can't we, David?
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that advice. I mean, speaking personally, yeah, I mean, a composer's life is generally more solitary than maybe other professions,
Yeah.
but I'm looking at it as an opportunity. Like I'm trying to divide my time between the stuff that I've always wanted to write that I hadn't had the focus or time to write before, and
Right.
also investing a certain amount of time in education and sharpening myself. And I mean, reading your book is one of those things, and being a part of whatever communities we are able to be a part of in this very strange time in history. Um, yeah, it's what we can do, and we adapt. Human race has done this for many years.
Yeah, as
So
Mason says on the YouTube chat, composers were sheltering in place before it was cool. So we're, we know how this goes.
It's
absolutely.
true.
Last thing on the book, I just wanted to mention because it really helped me. Like there's so many tips that are instrument or section specific, but also just how sections work with other sections, and also I mean even towards the end of the book because it's more than 200 pages. I mean it'd be a nice thick novel if it was printed. But you even get into career advice and frequently asked questions of people in our shoes who are either beginning, middle, or advanced in their careers, trying to figure out answers to some of these questions. I found it really valuable.
I think that I think that there is, if you're going to have a community that is embracing of everybody, that no question can be considered naive, right? I mean, yeah, it's there can be a party and a bunch of people are talking about something and they educate each other and then they feel really smart about it, and then somebody walks in and says, hey, I heard something, and they don't really know anything about it, and then everybody in that group can just say, oh well, that guy doesn't know anything. But without the collective knowledge of those people, those original group of people talking to each other, they wouldn't be that smart either, right? So you have to just think that this is one big road that we're all on, and we're all on the same road, so we're all travelers. We all have an equal validity to that. So somebody who's right here on the road who hasn't quite gotten to this place is still on that. You can't, we've got these um we've got this time travel aspect of being able to help each other out. That's really all mentorship is. It's just a bit of saying, hey, this is what I know right here. When you get to this point, maybe you'll be more informed about how to get there. Right. So I really try to keep it, like to make sure that I answer some of those questions that seem maybe too simple in other communities. That doesn't mean that like every answer, every question that is answered is a basic question, because there are a lot of questions in there that are actually deal with very subtle points. But just making sure that people have a foundation, I think, is really important, because otherwise they can't build on it, right? It's kind of like reading one of these books where it's talking, like say you're reading a history book or a book of commentary about something that is from a much older time, say like, Mark Twain or something, used to write journals and send them back to his newspaper. So if somebody says, oh, and everybody knows what happened on March the 30th, that really crushed us as a nation. All right, and now let's go on to this other topic, which really relates to that. And like, you never find out what happened on March the 30th, right? I don't want to be in that kind of community where all the knowledge is sort of esoteric, right? Anyhow.
Well, I mean, the advice that I found in the book, and I haven't even finished reading it, but I've skimmed some
Okay.
important sections. But it applies to people of all levels, and I think people of all levels can take parts of that advice at
Sure.
whatever level they're at. It's not like there are advanced topics and beginner topics. Even the beginner
Right.
topics are relevant to advanced, and vice versa. So it really is very universal. So thank you for writing. I think
Sure.
it's a masterpiece. I can already tell.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to put up the cover one more time just so people can see what we're talking about. This is
Right.
Thomas's new book. Tell us where we can get it.
Orchestrationonline.com. That's the website. And just go to the website, and on the home page, you'll see a column on the right, which has all of the things in my store. The original 100 orchestration tips and 100 more orchestration tips. I'm noticing people are like buying both, right? Just to kind of go through the whole schmagegi all the way through. There it is on the right. And there's my my canceled lecture. I can't look at that without feeling sad. There was an entire brass section that was going to demonstrate all of my points. So yeah, but hopefully that will be rescheduled yet again, and I will return to Los Angeles, to that area, sometime later this year. I'm hoping. There's some talk about me doing something in South America, and then flying from there back to LA and catching up with a lot of my family that I didn't get a chance to see. So yeah.
Well, we definitely look forward to having you back whenever we're allowed to do that. And
yeah, even if it's just to come to one of your events.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was really great to see the Alex North thing, because like I've always been the subject of a talk. I just flown into town. I got this weekend, we talk, and I take off. So it was really great to be part of the audience and to chat with everybody afterwards. And
yeah,
it was. Thanks so much for
inviting
me.
It was great to have you there, and we should probably expand on that, both in terms of the Academy of Scoring Arts and Orchestration Online, in terms of being communities that welcome both newbies and experienced professionals alike.
Yep.
We definitely do everything we can to make everybody feel at home, really foster a sense of community, and I mean we're honored to have you in our audience and as our guest, which we hope will happen again in person sometime in the near future.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and before we leave that topic, I also want to highlight that the event that you attended the week before your scheduled event, we took a look at the music of a legend of film music, Alex North. One of our board members, William Malpeed, along with Edwin Wendler, put a tremendous amount of time into looking at Alex's music and taking it apart. That entire video is up on our website now for members that want to check it out. But that's part of our particular mission. And I mean, I know there's a lot of overlap between what Orchestration Online does and what the Academy of Scoring Arts does. There's some overlap, and then there's also some differences of focus, which is awesome because we get to help people in different ways. One of the things, yeah, Ruben's got it up on the screen. So we took a look at his rejected score to 2001, which was fascinating to listen to in terms of where that movie could have gone if they had used his score. And of course, there's great legendary stories about what happened behind the scenes, some of which we actually got into in that event. Ruben, can you switch to the other one too? We also looked at the Misfits. You can go videos, and it'll be one of the first ones there. Yeah. And we took a look at Alex's Misfit score. And for me, speaking honestly, like I'm not a veteran of that era of film music, so rediscovering the music of people like Alex North, and we've looked at some others too, has just been really eye-opening. So yeah, William is in the chat. He says these are scores that many people may not be familiar with, and they're really brilliant. I completely agree. There's so much to learn from them. So we will definitely continue to do that. We'll hope to continue events with Thomas too in the future, and yeah, we will investigate all this stuff. I do want to note quickly. Oh, go ahead.
Too much. Anybody can go to our website, scoringarts.com, and see highlight videos from those and all of our other events over the years. And if you're a member, you have access to the full events. So definitely something to take some time to check out while we're all stuck at home.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Side note, I have seen some interesting comments in the chat, which I've kind of saved for later if we have time, if they're relevant to our discussion, because yeah, I also want to streamline what we're doing today and not keep Thomas for 4 or 5 hours, even though I'd love to. Um, Bill McFadden asks in the videos, do you have the score listed as well embedded in the video? Yes, indeed. Anytime we have our volunteer teams working on score prep or mock-ups, frequently we do mock-ups of every individual instrument in the score so that when we do our live events, we can play back stems or individual instruments and really deconstruct the way those scores are played. So the things that you hear in our live events, they do become part of our videos. The scores are part of the videos. And then we're also working on some next things in our next phase of being where we'll try and push some of that stuff online too. So that's all coming in the future. Great. Well, if it's okay with the two of you, let's round the corner to Gershwin, shall we?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay. So I'm beyond excited to take on Gershwin because Gershwin, for me, was a composer that changed my life. He essentially bridged, um, he was one of the earliest to make a bridge between the classical music world and the jazz world. And he was a songwriter, but then he had a lot of smarts up there. You know him best for Rhapsody in Blue, which was one of his earliest. It was 1924. Rhapsody in Blue is one that we have been actively planning to do a score study on, so it's probably going to come sometime this spring or summer, again depending on how the world copes with the virus. He was also very well known for An American in Paris, which is a gem of an orchestral piece, the piano concerto in F, Porgy and Bess, the opera, his one and only opera, and numerous songs that have well survived the test of time today. So Gershwin, pretty much a legend. Does anyone want to say anything on Gershwin before we dive more specifically into the preludes we're looking at today?
Just all that I would say is that if I had decided to go for a doctorate, my thesis would have been on the orchestration approach of Gershwin and the people that worked with him, like like Grofé orchestrating the first version of Rhapsody in Blue, and then going on to like other people that he might have worked with in Hollywood and so on. But just to sort of chase out all of those essential styles that sort of evolved around his music, his own and of course Grofé's, which it's really interesting to see the difference between Rhapsody in Blue and the piano concerto, which I feel is far better orchestrated than Grofé's version of Rhapsody in Blue. But I mean, what I think Gershwin was very wise to not try to fix something that wasn't broken. Right, the score existed. It was even published. Why should he go back and orchestrate it himself? He would just be sort of fixing up Grofé's notes. So it was really great that he moved forward and was able to just spend his energy on that, American in Paris, the much neglected second Rhapsody in Rivets, he was originally going to call it, which I feel is just a genius work. His variations on I Got Rhythm, also an orchestral piece for piano solo and so on. It's and then of course Porgy and Bess. I think he was a great orchestrator, and he solved a lot of problems with instruments that weren't normally guests in the orchestra, saxophones and so on. So he's also one of our seminal crossover orchestrators, right? In fact, you might call Rhapsody in Blue like the first great work of crossover orchestration. It wasn't the first jazz to concert music crossover. Even Mio's piece that predated that might not have been the first, but it's really, I think, the first great work where somebody just really brought together all those elements to get and created something that could be listened to, just on a jazz station or on a classical station. It was great thinking and a great piece of music. So, and that continued throughout his oeuvre. Anyways, that's all I've got to say about it. Sorry for butting in.
No.
I just wanted to chime in and say it seemed that in the last few years of his life, he was really starting to explore new boundaries, and it's really tragic that his life was cut short so early, because who knows what he might have done had he lived longer.
You know, anybody who wants a little bit more information about Gershwin, please check out my on the same website, Orchestration Online. I have a category for the Radio New Zealand programs that I presented. And one of them is a series called Composers on Camera. And in the fifth and last installment of that program, I talk about the film A Rhapsody in Blue that was made with Robert Alda and was basically just a big kind of a very sanctified portrait of Gershwin that's almost completely fictitious. You know, he's like super composer. He's got you know, they have to invent some limitations for him because they just cannot believe, you know, the people writing it can't believe that he could have gone so far so fast. But he actually had huge struggles that aren't the kind of thing you could talk about in a film at that time. So that might give you a little bit more perspective of like how people thought about Gershwin, and maybe just a little bit of an introduction to his actual biography, which is fascinating. It's far greater than anything that was said in that film. But that's just some more of my thoughts about Gershwin are in that particular. Composer as Hero is the name of the program.
Yeah, gosh, I wish we could spend a long time talking about Gershwin because there's so much to talk about here. I have the sense, I mean, Rhapsody in Blue is a fairly early work of his, but An American in Paris was only a year later, and the difference, I agree with you, the Rhapsody in Blue, its orchestration is more traditional and there's less detail to talk about, but in Paris is an explosion of color, and for
Yeah,
me, I feel like he absorbed very quickly, like the lessons he learned from that first orchestral performance,
yeah,
and I'm so glad you mentioned the second Rhapsody too. It's one of my favorites. It's now
yeah,
almost forgotten, but yeah, it's gosh, where could he have gone if he didn't? He was about 38 when he died, about the
yeah,
same age as Mozart.
yeah.
Um, but gosh, what he could have done with 20, 30, 40 more years of life.
Yeah, I would say if people want to hear kind of more realistic versions of those pieces, like as performed by Gershwin, check out Oscar Levant. He recorded everything: the piano concerto, both Rhapsodies, and the variations. And he was really in touch with the way that Gershwin played. And in that film that I mentioned, the Rhapsody in Blue film, he pulls off this really fun magic trick. He actually supplies everything for the film. But whenever it's Gershwin playing, Robert Alda pretending to play Gershwin or pretending to be Gershwin, Oscar Levant supplies source music in the style of how he remembers his friend playing, exactly, just as far as he could possibly get it. And Oscar Levant was just obsessive, literally, medically. And so that when you're hearing him play, that is his version of how Gershwin played. But then you hear himself, like every once in a while, he'll try to play on camera. And, you know, of course, Gershwin will come and just bump him off the piano and insist on playing himself, which was probably their real life relationship. But Oscar Levant plays in his style, which is a bit more nervous and a bit more masculine. You know, it's a little bit more macho. But I say even at that, he's much more in touch with probably the way that Gershwin sounded. So check out the Oscar Levant recordings. They're actually kind of hard to get right now because there's so many, you know, much better recorded, mastered, contemporary performances. But it's worth knowing just to compare and to get back to that energy of the time of the day, you know, the 20s and 30s.
Oscar's a great, yeah, because they were friends, and Oscar performed many of Gershwin's things. So, yeah, that's an amazing historical record. I have some of Oscar's books. They're hilarious. He's such a character. Um, Mark, you retracted your comments, which, yeah, he had some funny comments about Oscar, who was, yeah, hilarious. I also want to make a recommendation along these lines. I'm not going to ask to play them during this event because I'm not sure how YouTube handles the playback of copyrighted material. But if you search YouTube carefully, there are some videos of Gershwin playing the piano himself, and for me, they're really fascinating because they're not the way that modern players typically play them. He's very percussive, very physical, very rhythmic. Um, yeah, Thomas, have you seen those?
Yes, I have. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard pretty much everything that he did himself. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
fascinating. We also have some recordings of Gershwin himself made via piano roll. which have been restored, and we have modern acoustics there, but his playing, but they don't convey the passion with which you can see in the couple of YouTube videos that actually exist of the man himself. So, well worth looking at.
But by the way, it's worth because somebody asked. They said they thought they remembered that Rhapsody in Blue was finished or barely finished before deadline, and the description of the premiere on Wikipedia is pretty amusing and should also feel familiar to most of us. It was an educational experiment which involved 26 separate musical movements divided into 2 parts and 11 sections.
Okay.
And Rhapsody in Blue was the second to last piece, just before Elgar's Pomp and Circumstance. And not only that, but the ventilation system in the concert hall was broken. So, not an ideal situation for a premiere, but apparently, once everybody heard that clarinet glissando, the audience was enraptured. And as for the citation that the piano part was not written, according to Wikipedia, Gershwin decided to keep his options open as to when Whiteman would bring in the orchestra, and he did not write down one of the pages for solo piano, with only the words, quote, "wait for nod," on the band score. So he apparently improvised some of what he was playing and didn't write out the part until after the performance. So we may never know exactly how the original performance of Rhapsody in Blue sounded.
Well, we want to circle back to Rhapsody in Blue in a future session and dig deeper into it, because it is a masterpiece of American music. So let's go down to the Preludes. Just by way of a quick introduction, many people know this. If it shows up, it's not showing up because of my weird screen stuff. But this orange book, which was the Preludes for piano, this was published in 1927, and there are 3 preludes in it. And we all assumed, hey, that's all there is. That's what Gershwin did. We found out later that he actually wanted to write 24 of them. And they don't all exist, but they were republished in the mid-90s. 7 or 8 of them were kind of recovered, but they're all fragments. There are a few manuscripts that survive. There's a few pieces that became parts of other works of Gershwin's. So it's it was left in tatters a little bit, but so the Preludes for piano, the original 3 that were published during his lifetime, they're 1927. So we're about 3 years after Rhapsody in Blue, just after American Paris and the Concerto in F. It follows the traditional fast, slow, fast deal. So those are the Preludes. And for anybody who has not joined us on this type of an event before, we decided this would be a fun thing to do to throw the challenge open to the community. So a couple months ago, we posted on our website that any members of the community who wanted to have a hand at orchestrating a couple of these preludes could do so. And we selected just very specific sections, a little bit of the first and a little bit of the third prelude. We opened it up, and I believe we have about 8. Am I right, Reuven?
Yes, we have 8 submissions.
So we're going to look at 8 different modern orchestrations of these piano pieces, and we kind of left the gates open. We said, do whatever you want, take them in any direction you want. So we'll probably see quite a variety in approaches. I see one question here: can we still submit scores? It's a little late for that for this event, but let's get back to you on that question, and we'll see what we can do for a future session. Del says, "Hold the book directly under my mouth." You are correct. This is the original 1927, not like a first edition, but this is the one that everybody knows. And then this is the republished one in the mid-90s, the complete piano preludes as far as we have them. So this has 7 or 8 of them, but there's one duplicate. So anyway, that's stuff you can all research on your own time. But if you guys don't have any further comments, maybe we dive into the first one and have a play.
All right, so let's start out by taking a look just at the piano version and taking a listen to the piano version. Actually, Thomas, do we want to start with the third prelude, since that's what we're going to be first? All right.
If we start with the third prelude and just play the excerpted section, like the first page.
Okay, that might be a little tricky. I'll have to find it. So here's the third prelude. We'll get it eventually. Okay, it keeps on switching on me. Hang on. There we go.
All right, so that's the third prelude, and I decided that it would be better to talk about the third prelude entries first, just because there were fewer of them. There were only 3 as opposed to 5, and there weren't as many huge orchestrations. I'm kind of saving the huge orchestrations for last because there's a lot to unpack. So better to sort of warm up on things that had a slightly smaller scale. There's none of this order is in order of like quality at all. And in fact, I completely don't judge in that way of like one orchestration being better than another or more worthwhile or whatever. Some orchestrations might be more ready for the stands, is what I like to say. You know, like is that you could make parts out of it and put it on the stands on a stage and read it. All right. So, and some are not. So but that's not a judgment on quality at all. So if we can see the very first score, now that you've had a chance to hear that piece, in 6 flats and being so kind of very dancey and having kind of a Latin rhythm to it, and so the first score that we've got here is by Tyler Muller, and it's for a smaller ensemble. Now, if we could hear the audio on that, would that be possible before I jump into it?
Yes. Here it comes.
Okay, cool. All right. So, yeah, so a lot to talk about there. Starting on the first page, we've got a very limited ensemble here. Just oboe, English horn, bassoon, and so on. There doesn't seem to be octave transposition with this application that was used. Flat.io. I'm not familiar with that notation program, but it seems to me that the contrabass part and the contrabassoon part are non-transposing. Like the sounds that you hear are actually as written and they're not sounding an octave below. Maybe it's just the quality of the audio that is tricking my ear. But looking at how the contrabassoon and the bassoon are in fifths, right? If you really had wanted the contrabassoon to be playing fifths with the bassoon, it would have to be notated an octave higher, right? So that the E in the staff will sound, is going to sound an octave lower anyways, right? So sounding an octave lower would be the right note to be playing fifths with the bassoon. Okay. There is a problem here in that the key signature is 7 sharps and it should be 6 sharps, right? And so that's the reason why the melody sounds a little strange, because it's got an F flat in it, right? Which is that's the note that doesn't seem to make sense, right? So if it was a case of sort of copying what you saw on the piano score and then just writing the notes in and not really listening to that to the actual change, right? So just really watch out for that. If you're doing transcription by eye rather than by ear, I've actually found in transcription with my own orchestrations, I've done a ton of crossover orchestration. And sometimes I'll be given a song and they might have like anything like MIDI tracks, or they might have the recording, or the original recording that I'm supposed to imitate, or they might have like the sheet music. I actually find that transcribing by ear is the most accurate, because I can, so long as my fingers are doing everything that's correct and my ear is checking things, then I will get it right more often than if I'm just transcribing directly from one sheet of paper to the other sheet of paper, right? Which just seems to have been what happened here. So watch out for that particular way that you can get tripped up. Okay, so so it's strange. You've got this drum set thing going on, which seems to be a kick, which is sort of keeping a rhythm throughout the piece, that bottom line there. And it's kind of a neat idea, but it seems to me that that is just sort of a rhythmic pulse that could have been distributed to other instruments, right? Maybe there could have been like if you really wanted to be Latin about it, you could have had claves or maraca and a cuica and like a bunch of other things. Like you could have really explored that. And there is a score that does that. That really goes Latin with it, coming up soon. Now, we have a strange thing here. You've got English horn with 3 voices on it, right? If you look at that English horn part, it's basically playing chords, right? Which the English horn can only play 1 note at a time. So, I'm assuming that maybe you thought that you would have 3 English horns here. So much more typically if you had wanted to develop this and make it more of an orchestral piece, what I recommend is don't have the contrabassoon play that bottom note, just have 2 bassoons play that, right? Just play the 2 bassoons playing the fifths, right? Because that's the most common thing in the world. It's actually much more common for an orchestra to have 2 bassoons than to have 1 bassoon and 1 contrabassoon, right? Of course, it's also very common for there to be a contrabassoonist, but like 2 bassoonists is like the standard, right? So if you have a small orchestra, let's say that you've got a small orchestra to play this, 2 bassoons would just be there. So you don't even need the contrabassoon. Just score those fifths as bassoon and as first and second bassoon, and then it's taken care of, and you don't need to lug that beast out of its storage locker. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is English horn. So you want some mid-range instrument to play those chords. So why not have 2 clarinets, right? You can have oboe and English horn. So that's 2 of your double reed instruments, right? Your 2 upper double reed instruments, and then 2 clarinets. So the 2 clarinets could play the lower 2 notes. And then you would be able to distribute that in a much more balanced way, and you wouldn't need 3 English horn players, which, 1 English horn player, piece of cake. Most orchestras will have an English horn player ready to go. Okay, but 2 English horns, it's a little more of an ask. You're kind of getting into like the Rite of Spring territory, having more and more auxiliary instruments. But 3 English horns, that is a huge ask. Not to say that oboe players wouldn't think that was cool, but you already have an oboist. So you have actually 4 oboists asked for in this piece. If we could go to the next page, please, Ruben. Okay, so here we've got, hang on, I gotta get it on my screen too. So the next problem that we've got here is that really, really high cello scoring. And, that could have easily just been violin or viola, right? Right here, you're having the cellist play very, very high, very, very fast. And it's not really clear to me whether or not these are section strings or whether they're individual strings. So if it's individual strings, then you've got, I guess, a septet here, right? You've got 7 players plus the extra 2 to get the harmony in for the English horns. But yeah, it's really going to be hard for the for the solo cellist, kind of the way that you've got it here, to be playing that like not only to just start off bang in tenor clef in tenor register, you don't have tenor clef here, but really, really high there, and just to get that perfectly beautiful with the oboe. I mean, it's possible, but you need really good players. And like the scoring here is kind of on the level of a sketch. So you want to use instruments in the most obvious, most playable way, I feel. That way your score has a much greater chance of being performed by an orchestra. So really,
Thomas,
you could have gone, go ahead, jump
I'm
in.
just going to pick your brain here for a second and your expertise. Are there any instances you can think of from the repertoire of oboe and cello playing?
Oh yeah, no, that happens a lot.
Okay.
That's great. But I mean, it's just it's a little out of character, right? Like usually when you combine oboe and cello, it's a more sonorous, maybe a little slower kind of idea. Like with this, you've got the oboe has got this beautiful fluid character, and the cello has got a very searching character up there, but you're asking them both to play really, really fast, and I mean, yeah, it's possible. There's nothing that's impossible about this, but it's just like at that tempo and trying to make that kind of statement like right off the bat, it's a little less than ideal. It's just my feeling. I mean, it's completely playable by violin, right? It would have been. It's just easier to team up oboe and violin on those fast kinds of passages in that register. Okay, so that's just my feeling about it. The biggest problem for the oboe is that you're just assuming that they're going to play all the way down to that B flat comfortably. That would really require an excellent player to make that come off without squawking, just like that low B flat, just diving down. It's like Rimsky-Korsakov territory to get that low B flat and to play it really, really well. So like you were asking the oboe player to play something that is part of your sketch that is going to be a lot of work for them. And I would say like always try to do the least hard thing when you are in a situation where like maybe your piece might get read by an orchestra. So
Quick question from the live chat from Mike. If
sure.
that cello line that we're looking at right now, if that is the way the orchestrator wants to write it, would it be better to write it in tenor clef, or would you leave it as is?
Yeah, I would definitely write it as tenor clef. And there's something else about that is worth mentioning, and that is that the expressiveness of it does not actually match the slur pattern, right? You have to think it's so it would really be better to have the triplets under like one slur, and then the next two notes either slurred or staccato, and then the next two notes slurred or staccato, and then the final note of the passage to be like a staccato going into the accent, because you really want, because right now you're going down, up, and you're going up and asking them to do an accent at the end of the up bow, which is possible, but it's just clumsy, right? And then you need another up bow at the end of the second bar of the cello line. So it's just not worked out very well. I would say maybe do a slurred triplet at the beginning, and then either articulation marks or slurring in couples, like so it's down, up, down, up, down, up, right? So that's like the simplest way. Or it could be down, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? Either way, it works really, really well. It fits into the, it has more energy. Like when you're slurring a fast, nimble passage like this all over the place, it really changes the character. Sometimes there are a lot of things in here where there are no slurs at all, and it works pretty well. A lot of different arrangements that people have taken where they decide to slur or not to slur. Sometimes it works really great if you don't, because you're just really kind of fluttering around all the different things. But not to get into that too much.
Yeah, I would just add that singing through the phrasing the way you did, or even playing air cello, regardless of whether you actually know how to play a string instrument or not,
Right.
can be really helpful in terms of figuring that out.
Yeah.
You can really intuit what makes most sense in terms of what your intentions are.
Here, like if you really wanted to stay in this key and to keep everything right at the pitch that it is, it might be better to have clarinet, like we're adding clarinets, right? So that you have more voices. It might be better to have the oboe line be played by clarinet so that you can get to that low concert B flat without any problem. And it'd just be a nimbler sound. And have that like combined with, say, maybe viola or violin, and see if you want that mixture. I think that that would probably work better. If we can go to the next, to the final screen. So yeah, we've got that. See here, I feel that the slurring, like the little chromatic lines here in English horn in bar 13, and also in the cello, those should be slurred. So da da da. And I really like this whole idea of like the overlapping da da da, other instrument ba da. Okay, I think that that's a really cool idea, but I feel that they should both be slurred. Both of those gestures should be slurred. Da 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 dum, then da 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 da. Right? That just feels more authentic to me. And then in bar 15, if you listen to how the pianist plays this, and and Gershwin himself, those should be either staccatos or tenuto staccatos. Da 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 dun dun dun. Right? It's like he's like ba da da. Here is where I'm putting things, right? Rather than da 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 da. It seems to me to sort of take away the emphasis of that final note in bar 16, right? So it's just another way that like the nuances can of articulation and slurring and everything can actually just be part of the expression of the piece, that of the texture, of the meaning of the texture. Sorry, I'm getting a little inarticulate here. But yeah, like the once again, just the contrabassoon part and the contrabass part, that could all just be cello and actual regular bassoon playing at those given concert pitches, not an octave lower as they should be sounding, because that's really low. I mean, it just really puts the bass support at the very bottom of what's hearable, right? So that's a cool idea, but it just really separates the support that the contrabassoon can be giving to the bassoonist. So if that was just two bassoons plus cello helping out, and then the cello part is being played by a higher string instrument, then I think that you have a more functional score for a reading. And that's
great
kind
stuff.
of, unless Tyler is asking a question in the chat, I think that's probably all I have to say about this one.
Great. Yeah, I have one thing I wanted to mention, which is kind of philosophical, and it will be a challenge. I'm excited to see how other orchestrators did this, but in the original, in the intro that Reuven has up right now, when a pianist plays it, we have left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, and it's kind of like a Cuban type rhythm there. A pianist can execute that fairly easily because he's balancing left hand, he or she, a left hand against right hand, and is creating that rhythm, that syncopation. If this is not a professional ensemble, imagine you are the 3 English horn players and you are called to play 2, 3, 4, like I did it wrong even because I'm trying to sight read, but playing offbeat syncopations like that is a recipe for disaster if they're not professional players, because you don't have the luxury of playing the bass note on the beat and then your note on a syncopation. That might well fall apart in rehearsal if written like that. I might have said you might want to give the 3 English horn players, maybe they do have to play the downbeat, bop, 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 so that they actually get those phrasings, because it is difficult to play, and going at this tempo, it can fall apart easily. So got to be careful when you're transcribing something that was written for piano to a few dozen individual players. That might not render that well.
Even if it's just one player in the ensemble that is playing all the rhythms, so that the upper note can be grabbed onto by the other players who are just going to play the syncopation. That can work really, really well. So you have one person in the middle going dun 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 dun, and then you have like the bass notes or the bass instruments kind of listening to where they're playing the low part, and the middle range treble instruments listening to where the upper part is. Sometimes that, like, just having one timekeeper can also be good. Or if there is like somebody actually playing the rhythm, like as a drum kit, or if there's like a group of percussionists that are kind of beating it out, as I think we'll see in the next score, then that can also provide a guide. But it's a really good point, David.
Yeah, let's, for the sake of time, let's move on to the next orchestration, because there'll be lots of different things to point out.
Okay,
Let's see how someone else did it.
sure. All right, so next one is by Bill McFadden, and
Who is with us on the chat? I've seen him earlier. So
it's great. Hi, Bill. Okay, so this is I mean, you just have to hear you have to hear the MIDI mock-up to get this. All right, so go ahead, Ruben, whenever you're ready.
Here we go.
I think that's so fun. It's just yeah, it's just really, really fun. To you know, to slow it down and to just really give in to its Latin character. And I really like the use of the percussion all the way through. Tambourine, triangle, snare drum, bass drum. We could have maybe gone with more Latin sounding instruments to kind of get it more authentic. Like, for instance, you can barely hear the triangle. That could have been like a clave. And yeah, but I mean, not to get too elaborate, it's still a great idea. You know, it's almost like a drum kit part, really, just being expanded into several different instruments. So I like that a lot. So all right, so Bill, let's talk about a few different standards of scoring just to help you out here. Okay, so you're not going to say flute A2 or flute a due if you want to be Italian about it. You're just going to say two flutes, right? You just write the word two, or the words two flutes, right? Or flutes 1 and 2, right? And so on. Just, yeah, so don't go A2. So A2 is a specific marking that means this one voice has two instruments playing it. Okay, so don't use A2 just to say, oh yeah, with two. Okay, because it really does have a specific thing. Okay, so because it gets really confusing. Like, let's look at the first bar there in the trumpets. So trumpet A2 in B flat. So the conductor has no idea here whether you mean, does that mean that the first bar and a half, those single F sharps and then a G, does that mean that that's with two? Or does it mean that it's always going to be two instruments unless you see a harmonic interval? Do you see how that's sort of confusing? All right, so that's the other thing. And then kind of looking down the page, we have violin, viola, cello, contrabass. Okay, so violoncello A2, you normally would not use A2 or A due in a part unless you had like solo players or desks or whatever. If you had like individual players within a texture and you'd already established that, right? So A2 shouldn't be used on strings to begin with. But there's also the problem here that that we have a very, very limited strings. Like, once again, I can't tell whether or not this is meant to be a section, right? Like section violins, section violas, section cellos. I mean, I'm guessing that that's like a set, you know, the way that it is scored, that says to me that this is a quintet of players.
So,
right?
so Bill chimes in and says they're supposed to be solo players.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, all right. Well, I mean, if that is the case, then those players would really have to balance in order to play against the brass, right? So if this were an orchestral score and that those were section players, then yeah, then strings forte and brass mezzo forte, and you've got a balanced part there with the impact blending and meshing, right? Rather than what we've got here is what you would hear in practice would be, you would basically hear the brass and you hear a little bit of strings behind them, and you'd be able to hear that violin line, which is great, but it would be very, very much overwhelmed by all the other elements on the page. But I mean, you would kind of want like flute or oboe to be, or clarinet, even better, to be doubling that line if you wanted to just to stick out, and you just really were limited to these players. All right. So, why this is an orchestration exercise, in which anything is possible. So unless you are actually intending to take these scores that we're doing in these challenges to an orchestra or to a group of players or an ensemble that why hold back? Why can't that just be a whole section of strings with the first and second violins, right? And they could both be playing that line, and then it could really cut through without the need for any doubling from the winds, right? So I'm just noticing a lot of holding back in these scores of like, solo strings or this and that, where it really could just be a nice, big, rich orchestral score. You don't have to be afraid of it. It's just like the function is the same. It's just that the strings are bigger, right? Okay.
Thomas, we
So
have one question, which is, do you have a rule for when to use more dynamic markings and when to let players of the session balance their sectional and ensemble dynamic?
I would say that it makes sense when, the conductor can balance it. And there's going to be one or two examples of just over marking, just kind of what I call dynamic mixing, using dynamic marks as kind of like a mixer, which I think you should try to make the actual character of the instruments and their own innate strengths be what balances, right? That's always the safest way to balance a score. But in this case, like usually the brass players will realize if they get a mezzo forte marking, especially mezzo forte, that they are meant to blend with the other instruments, right? So if the brass here were marked mezzo forte, even in an ensemble like this rather than an orchestra, then they would probably try to play behind the strings a little bit so that there was a better mixture of sounds. And sometimes even just like the players will even just play down a little bit so that they can hear what everybody else is doing, especially like brass and percussion, right? I mean, there's a big joke that like, the brass intentionally play louder than everybody else, and that's a big macho thing, or it's a big ego thing. But actually the truth is, in most professional situations I've been in, like, I know there's this one professional duo of viola and trumpet. It's a married couple, and they work in Auckland, and they're both members of the Auckland Philharmonia, or used to be. And I swear you can hear them. You can hear both players. You can hear that viola very clearly because the trumpet player knows that they should adjust to their dynamic. But to a certain extent, that kind of makes overall dynamics like this meaningless when you have such a powerful instrument right next to such a moderated instrument, which really needs a lot of players in order to balance correctly.
Right. And Bill wonders if it might be helpful to put the brass and mutes to balance.
No, because then like I was saying before, you get like you actually, with the mutes, they might actually stick out more, right? Because you get more high end, and that will interfere with the strings just as much. So it's better just to mark them down. Like, don't worry about mutes. Just like have the brass playing mezzo forte, and then they know, like, even if they end up playing piano or mezzo piano, they know that they're supposed to moderate. So think of M as being moderated, right? So moderated forte. And, it steals a little bit of the beauty of the instrument when you take it down from forte to mezzo forte, or when you take it up from piano to mezzo piano, because those are blending dynamics, right? That just like, it's, you should try to see if you can score your solos forte or piano, right? And just to really allow those areas to be special and to, have bigger worlds. Mezzo forte is such a small world, but in this case, it's really useful for keeping the players in a correct balance, or just have section strings, right? That's the easiest thing of all, I would say. And then, because like the cellos could just play like you don't have to have violin, cello, A2. You can just have your section cellos, and then they can play that divisi, or they could. I mean, those are all perfect fifths, and that's pretty easy for a cellist. So they could just play those perfect fifths as double stops, non-divisi. Right. Anyway, so let's go to the next page. So we're writing. So we sort of started little chord, oboes plus flutes. I like the harmonization here. I think that works really, really nicely. I would say that the slur is going to be a little clumsy. I think it would be better to go da 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 ba, right, rather than da da, because it's like you're asking the player to maintain their breath, jump down and then up, right? So they're really, it's better to go da 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 than ba da, right? And it's almost better to slur into the, slur across the bar line, unless you really want to emphasize the downbeat. But
What about slurring when you're going over the break at B here?
That is really not that big of a problem. Like, it's more of an issue with like semi-pro to community players or student players. That's not, because like there are ways of faking it. If there's like for instance on beat 1.5, going from that A up to that high C, that's just is just like the easiest thing for a flute player. So that's not a big deal. But I mean, it could also be da 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 da, right? There are some notes added in there for that. But yeah, so it could be a mixture of slurs, but it's all just has to do with like inflection, right? Like what is the meaning of what people are trying to express? I really like the little trombone French horn thing on bar 6. That is very, very fun and very funny. I think that this is a place where you should add a hairpin. It's like it just to kind of let it come out and then go back in. And then it's a similar thing is repeated with oboe. It's not going to be the most finesse thing to slur down to that low C for the second oboe player, but it's totally possible. Once again, it's just easier if you go slur on the triplet and then jump down to the C and articulate that one separately, which is just not the funnest note for an oboist to play, but it's still doable. And then the rest of it is totally fine. And then we've got clarinet, like the clarinet part, like they could just be doing everything all day long and they don't even care. I mean, there's a lot of questions come about like the, slurring across the break for the clarinet and so on and so forth. That is like not the biggest problem for, it's just something that the composer needs to be aware of just like not overdoing it in crossing the break over and over and over again in a kind of a really fiddly way. But stuff like this, it's just totally not a problem at all. Now, I feel that the least successful sounding iteration of that thematic material is with the trumpets. Just in the way that it's scored, right? It's just, it all sounds completely fine, except it's just really going to sound not really cheesy, but just a little ineffective, I feel. It would be better to take off, like just to slur the triplet, right? And then just to have things more kind of like more of a crescendo going towards the end. And then like that supports the idea a little bit more. Yeah, but there's nothing really wrong or anything about about anything else. It just kind of all works pretty well. But like you've got your trombone doubling the cellos, and you could just have the cellos playing this, like add a bassoon part, right? And then have the bassoonists and the cellos doubling each other on that accompaniment style, and then just have the trombone come out and do it, just have that, save that instead of having the trombonist kind of go over and over, right? And yeah, There also needs to be a little bit more, like a lot of these, like some of these scores are scored without like thinking about divisi and unison, or double stops, or whether or not one or two voices is being used in some of the parts. And I'll forgive that, but just really be aware, like, you know, from page 5, or sorry, from bar 5, the trombone part, really that you know, you'd have to be deciding whether or not they were unison on the first note, and then it was divided between two players on that second note, that E6th, and then going back to the A is that unison again, right? So all that has to be really, really clear in the score when you are scoring this out for an orchestra. All right, let's just take a look at the last page.
Thomas, we have a few, hopefully quick questions here.
Sure.
Lots of questions coming in. So, first of all, in the horns, is this octave jump in bar 6, and then again in bar 10, going to be a problem at all?
Now, piece of cake.
Okay.
At low E, it's nothing.
Even with the big jump.
Yeah, no, it's.
And then,
player can pop that out.
What else do we have? Carl King wants to know, will clarinets 1 and 2 get their own parts, or will they read from a shared part? And
No, all parts in a professional situation should have divided parts. Everybody should be playing their own thing, which is another thing that helps the copyist, right? Like going back to my issue about bar 5 and the trombones, the copyist doesn't know what to write, right? Like a score that is really completely worked out and hand it to the copyist, they should not even have to ask that question, right? And if they do have to ask the question, then like that also means the conductor doesn't know what's going on there, right? So
Right.
so like, and if the players get a shared part like that without distinguishing, they won't even know what to do either, right? So you really have to decide who is playing what note, and you know, and like if there's like, are there two players on the first note, and you know, then we know that there are sharing like that sixth, and then are they coming back into a unison? And if that's so, shouldn't they be in separate voices? Like you could just give that one single middle C to the first trombonist and let everybody else do it, or you could take my advice and just not make the trombonist do that and give it to the bassoons, but then you still have to work that out, right? You still have to work out who is, you know, who is playing what note at any given time. All right, if we can go to the next page.
Yep. Actually, we have a request just to play through this one more time, just to refresh everybody's memory.
I think that we're going to end up spending a lot of time on every thing if we do that. I really apologize to the audience, but like, you know, each one of these scores is going to be incredibly interesting. It's going to bring up a lot of stuff, but it's like, it's really going to take, it's just not fair to the people who have yet to have their scores evaluated.
Not a problem.
Okay. All right. So bar 13, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the balance to have the oboe player play that G sharp in second flute, right? I mean, you have the oboist coming along here parallel with the flute, so just to maintain the same sense of sound, you could just have them continue on. They could play that G sharp and they won't be hurting the first flutist's projection at all, and it'll sound great. I think that'll be sounding more natural than, you know, flute and oboe, ba da da, and then flutes, da. But like, you're robbing the impact of the ba da da ba da, right? Da da da. It doesn't, you know, da 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 da, right? It's just, or even da 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 da, right? Just think about, like, you have to really sing it to feel where what the nuance is, what the meaning is. And then in bar 14, the biggest problem probably in the entire score is that you are assuming that the flutist can balance with all the other stuff that's going on, and with the more forceful projection of the oboist over it. Why not just use, you know, you've got a C sharp there, that's totally playable by the second oboist, or by the clarinet player if you just want a kind of a mixed sound, right? And then da 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 dun dun. It's a little strange. You've got the horn player staccato, and you've got the trumpets legato. So I feel that it should be more unified there. You know, you should either go by yeah or da 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 dun dun. See, I really like the staccato because it just really, once again, sets up the cadence. Ba da da bum bum bum. We're back in our home key of A major for this score. Right. So I just feel it's more, you know, it just places the emphasis in the right place a little bit better. Maybe some of these little things like, you know, slurs and things were not part of what you were originally considering, but but they're just really, really important to the way that the music is expressed, and may even just affect the entire balance and you know and perception of the work. It just can, you know, one staccato in one little place, right? That's something that's worth studying in everything from Mozart up to, you know, Lutoslawski.
That's wonderful stuff. Thank you for all that. I feel like
Sure.
there's so much to learn from so many different approaches to this. I know we want to keep it moving. I have one very short comment. Ruben, if you go back to page one, one thing that this orchestrator did, and I'm just taking a bird's eye view at how he adapted the rhythms. This is a very playable example of how something that was originally written for piano can be effectively transcribed. If you
Sure.
look at things like the cellos, violins, trombones, that dun 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 dun, very playable, and you actually allow those players to get into the groove, and
Yep.
even the ones that are doing the offbeats, like horns and trumpets, for example, ba 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 ba, that's also very playable. So
Yep.
he solved the issue of how do we get those Latin rhythms into an ensemble playing it.
Sure.
This is a great example of how that can be done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a like it's a like as I was saying at the beginning, it's just such a cool score. You know, the just to really go for broke on the Latin rhythms, have percussion in there, and timekeepers, like I was saying before, to help people keep on track. Slowing it down also really helps people get where the syncopation is, as you were saying. Yeah, so I mean, it's a neat score. Yeah.
Very much so. Shall we move to our next orchestration?
Yep, let's do it.
Yeah, so I'm
Theo,
not gonna
Theo, who I
say.
believe I've also seen in the chat today, I
Yep.
think.
Okay, great. So I'm not going to say anything until we hear the until we listen to the mock-up on this as well. So let's have a listen. Okay, that's great. All right, let's jump back to the first page. Okay, so yeah, so once again, I'm sort of saving the most spread out score for last, just to really make sure that I've got, you know, that I'm really fresh on everything. Um, yeah, so here we've got, you know, we've got the trading off, you know, bum 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 bum. Okay, we've got three bassoons. Not clear on whether or not that is three, like, you know, three. Right? Is that supposed to be three bassoons, or it really does keep things very, very band focused. Like this opening is very, very band sounding, because like there's nothing in there that isn't in a band, and like in a concert band, it's really, there's like no strings until the mano, right? And I mean that it's all workable. You know, I like the marcato horns. That, you know, totally works out. Is really, you know, the horns have got the right chord voicing. Um, I think that the English horn plus clarinets, it's a good kind of moderating sound for the horns. It's not really going to balance if they're both playing forte. You know, you would kind of want your winds to be out a little bit more, maybe like mark them fortissimo or mark the horns mezzo forte or something like that. But it's still is a really nice sound to mix horns with middle winds. It has a really kind of rich, dark sound, sort of like Eastern European orchestration uses that a lot, that kind of mixture. The only thing that I feel is not going to be quite as successful is you've got brass mixing with winds, which is okay. You know, like your tuba, you got that low note, which is doubled by arco double bass, and then you've got violins, violas taking over, and they are mixing with the trombones. Okay, so that's really not going to, the strings are not going to really be all that strong there. Like if you want a nice combined sound with strings, you should go contrabassoon, second bassoon, second bassoon, first bassoon, right? That would be, you know, or maybe have the tuba underpinning, but like with all of those trombones, they're really going to be bigger than the strings there, especially with it starting with an accent, right? On that, we're on bar 4. So yeah, so just kind of, you know, going like, and then what happens is you've got the solo on top of that, right? So I feel that if you've got heavy brass under that and you've got this little oboe solo at mezzo forte, it's not that people won't hear the oboe, it's just that they're not going to pay attention to it, right? Whereas if you have you know, bum bum bum, you've got that with, let's say you had that with strings and lower winds, and then you had a slight decrescendo so that you could start with your oboe note, bum. And there's no reason why the oboe note can't just be a plain old forte, right? I mean, it doesn't have to, why should it be mezzo forte, right? It should just be strong, right? Because you are about to express something with it, and it's got to grab the attention of the audience, right? So it is okay to not to transcribe the dynamics of the part. So if that, you know, that first note being, I think, is mezzo forte in the piano score, so you can just throw that away. Just really think about orchestral dynamics in this situation. The last thing that I would say is the little harp. You know, you're sort of ripping through the you're glissandoing through different notes that you want to emphasize on the way up. That's sort of limited in terms of, because like for the harpist, it's kind of like bum brium brium brium, right? That's kind of, they end up like, if you really kind of want to time it so that it's even all the way through, you just need to draw a line between 2 points. Because, you know, those, you know, you've got the distance of an octave, then a seventh, and then another octave. So if the harpist is just timing things correctly, you're going to cover those notes anyways. But if you have that glissando mark from one note to the next note to the next note, there you're going to end up getting a bum yum 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 kind of a sound, right? So, and if you want that, then it's better to go, like, to notate it as 16th note, and then the next 16th note glissando up, right? So that you really have each step along the way emphasized, but
Thomas,
not that anybody's going to hear it with those trombones going.
Theo asks, what about splitting it into separate hands on the harp?
Yeah, that could work too, but then you want to do it over separate staves, right? So just go to bass clef in both hands, and then just, you know, left, right, left, up to the C, right? Or you could go glissando up to the right hand plucking the C if you want to. But yeah, anyways, okay, so now let's check out the next page. Okay, so we have really, really thick doubling there, oboe plus 2 flutes plus piccolo. Okay, now here I would say throughout this entire these entire 16, or bar 5 to bar 16, the piccolo is probably dispensable, or you could probably just leave it out. And it, you know, I mean, right now it's adding just a teeny bit of sheen to the wind melody. Okay, and it's an extremely weak register. And, you know, anything C in the staff to below for piccolo is really weak. It just really does not cut through. Like nobody's really going to hear the piccolo all that much until bar 12. That accent on that high E, right, or the E in the staff. And then when you get to the end, you're going all the way down to E at the bottom of the staff in bar 16. That's just like completely not even heard at all. But if this were flutes playing in octaves, then you would hear that upper line beautifully. It would really stand out nicely, right? Because that's the strong part of the flute. Like, you know, B, C, B at the beginning in bar 5, above the staff, right? So just change the flute part to octaves, like wherever you would normally have that piccolo, and then just get rid of the piccolo part, because it's just really, you know, it's kind of like having a song flute play along with you an octave higher. Really, it just doesn't have, or a folk flute. It doesn't really have that same energy, that same strength, right? And then just in general, as you start to descend, like from bar 13, that's really more of like a clarinet register, right? If you really want that to be strong, 13, 14, and 15, even that low E in bar 16, and it just really is not, you know, you've got your flutes really carrying a lot of weight there, and they don't have very much projection at all, right? That's really, you know, your clarinets, you've got 3 bassoonists, right? And you are asking them to go A3 from bar 13 to 16. Why can't the 3 bassoonists take some of those parts that are being played, or all of the parts that are being played by the clarinets is totally in their register, just give that all to the bassoonists, and then have the clarinets take over what the flute is doing, and then just don't even worry about, or maybe have the flutes play an octave higher so they're covering the weaker register of the piccolo, right? So then you've got a much more balanced, you know, stronger, like, you know, the crescendo there from 15 to 16 is just not going to mean anything with that weak flute on top, right? And especially when you've got you got everything else. You got those horns and trumpets. You know, the flute is just going to disappear. It's, you know, it's not going to really exist. Okay, so that's my first comment on that. Okay, so let's talk about the treatment of the melody, which I think is actually, despite all my criticisms of flutes in weaker registers, is actually a pretty cool one. So da-da-da-bum, and when you go down to that lower note, we've got the first violin taking over and just providing a pedal point to that note, and then the English horn, ba-da-da-da-da-da, and that's really nicely placed. These are, yeah, so this is scoring in C. So yeah, so all of that is possible on, yeah, and in a good register for the English horn. So that works all the way through. I like that. Now here you're using your 3 bassoons just basically just as kind of like as like the left hand, or the upper part of the left hand, just to kind of solve those problems. You just have to be aware of that, like the consequences of that kind of sound. Like you could be scoring that part piano, right? You could be having that accompaniment be soft and being played in brass, and that actually would like cut through way better, right? The bassoons are going to have a certain kind of ruddy, kind of throaty character to, that's not quite, I mean, it'll be precise, don't get me wrong, but it won't have the same kind of push as just a piano staccato in brass, right? So long as you're aware of the consequences of scoring those instruments. But I do like the overall balance that you've got there. I like the clarinet coming in and doubling certain notes at an octave higher, that you've got from bars 5 through to 12. I think it's cool that you got the blended oboe and flute sound, but once again, it'd be better to do that as flutes and octaves. So second flute would be doubling the oboe. So far, you know, that all works really great. And then bringing in the violins and bar 8, if you could bring the screen up a little, bring in the violins and bar 8, and then just for emphasis, right, just joining in, they're going to have a tendency to really dominate, like in a real situation. Like, even though, of course, winds and brass being stronger than strings, you wouldn't expect it, but just because the forcefulness of the part, so it's kind of interesting to me that you've got a really lovely bowing pattern for the violins, but it's not really expressed in the in like the English horn part. So you've got, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? So dun 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 dun. So why is the English horn going dun dun, right? Dun. Why can't the English horn just go dun 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 dun, right? It's just like pushing that downbeat is so much more powerful. And same thing for the clarinet, bum bum, as opposed to dun. So it doesn't really, if this is really a piece about danceable rhythms, it's all based on the dance rhythm. We're really soft pedaling the downbeat when we slur into it. Even if we're slurring into an accent, it just doesn't have the same amount of, and it's the same exact thing, da 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 dun dun dun. If we go to bar 15 on the next page, we've got da 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 dun dun in winds and brass, and it's really only the strings that are going da 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 dun dun dun. So why can't, and you've got this beautiful thing here in the violas, you've got staccato, you've got mezzo staccato, you've got staccato, slurred staccato. So why can't the whole orchestra do that? Right? Because we're trying to finish this, we're trying to finish the cadence. Oops, I had a feeling that would happen. Da 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 da. We just, this seems like da 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 da, just doesn't really, it kind of doesn't feel dancey. Da 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 dun dun dun. Hey, that's got more lift. It's kind of showing people where to put their feet to an extent. Okay, as far as the accompaniment for this, it's all pretty good. It's all workable. No big comments about it. I like the way that you hold off on bringing the brass in, and then you sort of really keep them back, and then they just kind of punch out at the end. So no problems there. I feel that the harp, though, is pretty much, anywhere it's not playing glissandos, it's not going to be audible. So like that little part at the end, you've got this little kind of back and forth thing, that's not going to come through at all. And even in the mix that you had, it didn't really come through. If it were like 2 octaves higher and marked fortissimo, then maybe somebody could hear it, right? But would that be an element you'd want to add to your music? That's another question. So those are my thoughts on this. And as you could kind of tell, I really had to like kind of break down certain parts in order to cover everything, because it's such a big, it's such a vertically such a huge score. But yeah, those any questions from from our viewers?
There is one important live chat question. Did you have a go-to reference for learning idiomatic bowings from Scott?
Yeah, that was pretty much being a violin and viola player when I was a teenager. So yeah, I spent a couple of years, I started off being really excited about it, but the problem was that the social structure of the junior high school string orchestra was just very, very poor. And it had nothing to do with the maestro, who I dearly loved, and he was a really, really great guy, but he had been teaching, and he was, he'd been doing this for so long that he just really had gone past the point of, of being Mr. Chips or being a school psychologist or whatever with his groups. He wanted them to just really handle their own stuff, but it was not, it was just really not a good organization for me. And it's a shame, because if it had been, I would have loved to lead them. I got to the point of being first chair for a while, and I just really got bored with just the real negative, angry feeling from all the players. So I just kind of dropped back and played viola for a while. And I'm really grateful for that, because it taught me more about being in the middle of the orchestra and what the middle voices are, rather than just being the violinist. And of course, as you see that back there on the wall, I've got a cello, and right here we've got, sorry, a mandola. and then down here, Amanda cello. So I kind of learned about those inner voices, and I was really always much more interested in composing than in performing too. But like that really gave me a lot of reference for it. But like you don't have to be that, you know, you do not have to do that in order to get some good instincts. What you really need is to try to get a hold of some parts that have been bowed already by, you know, a good orchestra, and then just to follow along and see how they solve all these problems of all kind of coming in emphatically and with the same kind of bow, pushing with the same kind of up bow at the right moment. And you know, after a while, you just kind of absorb it, and you get a better idea of what to do. But you know, you do not have to mark bowings like we've got in the score, like here at the. If we can go back to the piece. At bar 13 in the violins, you notice that there's like an up bow marked. Ba-da-da. Okay, so that's really does not need to be marked more than once. That's like all, you know, the players will get your intention that you want to get that kind of sound. But you know, you don't, you know, like da-da-da, ba-da-da, da 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 dun dun dun, like they are going to solve those problems. That is the job of the concertmaster, to bow your parts. Okay, so unless you know that the orchestra you're working with has got a concertmaster who doesn't have the time, that you shouldn't bother. All right, you should just definitely leave it up to them. Like, and also if we look at the other page at bar 8, you don't have to go back. Bar 8, there's a setup there. Everybody in the orchestra is going to know, or all the violinists are going to know, that that should be an up bow at, you know, going into bar 9. They're all going to play that, even with, you know, a situation where it's a little unclear, like if they've been playing, say, down bow at bar 5 and then maybe up bow at bar 7, they're still going to be playing an up bow because they want to hit the downbeat on bar 9 as a down bow. Right, so it's really unnecessary for us to make those kinds of decisions. We can just decide that we will lay out the slurs in a way that they're bowable, right? And then just leave it to the players to work that out.
This is great. There's much more we could get into, but in light of still having 5 ahead of us, I'll suggest we move on.
Okay.
So now I think we're on to the first prelude. Am I correct?
Yeah, let's go. Let's if we can have a listen to that in its original piano context, that would be great.
Yep, here we go.
Okay, so just like that is such a sassy opening for a set of pieces. That is really, you know, I love that, and also the single line, you know, it's that takes a lot of brass, you know, not literally, but it takes a lot of boldness to just really say what you're going to say in 5 notes and then repeat it with a slightly different twist at the end. Because then he just sets up everything and then jumps into setting up the dance rhythm and then reiterating the theme and so on. So yeah, so it's, I mean, it's in a way, it's just really, it's a very basic kind of construction, but it also requires a lot of daring, and it's definitely the work of somebody who was extremely confident about what they were writing. They knew that it was going to work. And they probably played, I think I remember hearing that he played these preludes at parties and stuff like that, like, you know, just for fun, just kind of like, just to impress his friends. So let's jump to our first score by Jordan here.
Jordan, are you with us in the live chat? Say hi if you are.
if I neglect to say who scored what, apologies. Okay, so we've got a wind quintet version here, and I have to admit that I have actually scored out this entire set of preludes as a wind quintet, which was my wife belonged to, was it the Palo Alto Wind Quintet or something like that? She lived in San Francisco with me for about a year before we ended up moving permanently to New Zealand. For her, she was just visiting me from New Zealand, but I eventually moved here. But she belonged to a group in the South Bay, and they commissioned me to score this for wind quintet. So I actually know all the parts and functions really, really well. And it's really great to see everybody orchestrating it in just sort of massive context. And there's even one arrangement that's coming up soon that really sounds very Gershwin-like in its orchestral approach. But like for me, it just really does feel like kind of a chamber kind of a piece. So I really relate to this kind of scoring. Okay, that said, I would say that alto flute is probably not the right instrument to be using here. You know what works really, really well in this situation is English horn. Okay, because it covers pretty much the same range as the alto flute, and it's much stronger in its lower register. So like alto flute has kind of it's sort of strange because like the bore is a little bit bigger, and the lower notes are beautiful and soft and velvety, but they're not powerful. They don't really punch. And also the quality of the timbre on higher notes just becomes kind of narrower and narrower. In one of my courses, orchestration, I think it's 103, which is flutes and oboes, I demonstrate an alto flute playing the same excerpt, I have an alto flute and a standard flute playing the same excerpt. And you can tell, just like, even though the flute is in a weaker register and is playing lower in its range than the alto flute, it still has a richer sound, right? So the alto flute does not have the richest sound. It has a beautifully evocative sound. It has a folk flute type of sound. It has just a really wonderful magical sound. But I feel like as part, just like an anonymous member of an organization like this, and especially like getting to places like which we'll see later on, where it has to kind of carry the lower part and compete with like clarinet, it just really is not going to be much of a competitor. Whereas English horn has got the range, it's got the strength, and a very, very strange thing is that English horn and alto flute can actually sound similar. It's a very, very weird phenomenon, but we don't have time to talk about it, but I feel that English horn is a much stronger choice for you here.
Thomas, I'm just going to point out, since we do have an XML file from Jordan, we can actually check that out, at least in mock-up form, with the Note Performer. I quickly replaced.
Oh, no, it's not necessary.
Okay.
It's all right. No, I just, I mean, the ranges, the alto flute goes down to a concert G below middle C, and English horn goes all the way down to E, right? So it's a compatible range. So anyways, we don't need to rethink it at all. So
I meant in terms of we can contrast the mock-up.
Oh, right.
Each.
I would say if we had more time, that would be, that would be more of something that I would want to do. But let's have now that I've pointed some of those things out, let's have a listen to this just in its original form. Okay, so I think that last note was supposed to be, I think there was a mistake there. I think that should
Yeah,
have been
A
B
flat
flat.
and the flute.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so I mean, like you can hear that, like Jordan's sound picture there is like very kind of sort of very hollow and mellow sounding, and that's actually cool. I don't want to take away from that. You know, maybe my suggestion of English horn does not really work in that context, but there's just, like, you know, that end of the piece, the screen that we're looking at right now, the alto flute is just not going to be able to contribute in the same exact way. Like if everybody kind of came down in dynamic level right there, then the alto flute could compete or balance with the clarinet, but it just really is, you know, is a little, that's just a little far out. Of course, like quintet playing, you sort of break all the rules because those players can balance with each other in beautiful ways. And Jordan, if you are a flute player, then I apologize for anything, you know, if you feel that you could get a stronger sound out of flute than I'm saying that you could, then my apologies. But
What
just
about clarinet?
well, I mean, we already got a clarinet, right? So if we want, I mean, there could be 2 clarinets plus flute that would maintain some of that kind of more square tone kind of a sound. But you know, but then you were kind of spoiling the surprise. Like there won't be a contrast of timbre between the first bar and then bar 7 where the clarinet comes in when it's with its own solo, right? So or, you know, you could even just have that opening solo played by flute, right? It's perfectly within the flute's, you know, just have the flute player go ba-da-dum, bum-bum, and then bassoon answering. And then towards the end, and, you know, on the third page of the third system, then that could be like English horn, or, you know, adding or trading off or whatever. Okay, so to get back to the beginning, everything else works great here. There's a lot of really low flute scoring, but, you know, like I said before, I'll kind of give you a pass on that because, you know, just because like the players will tend to balance things out as much as they possibly can. And this really does remind me of my own score to a degree. I mean, there are certain problems that you just cannot solve in too many different ways, right? So this is kind of similar to my own arrangement. All right, so let's go to the second system. And I feel that that's a really strong register for the clarinet. I think that works great. I think that the answering flute is really nice. And I think that is wonderfully strategic to have the clarinet finish the flute's line to a degree in bar 8, you know. Da-da-da, ba-da-dum, ba-da-bum-da-da. Right? I think that works really, really nicely. Yeah, it's just really, I don't see that many problems with it, just except that, you know, alto flute just feels a little off balance to me. I mean, there's nothing about it that really wouldn't work there. It's just my main problem is really with the third page. And then, you know, and then moving on to the third system there, we've got the, you know, the problem with taking this approach is that you end up with really low flute parts, right? Going all the way down to C sharp. So in this context of a quintet, you can get, that will kind of work. Okay, it still doesn't have a, what you end up having a problem with in this situation is not so much an audio balance, because like the players would more or less be listening to each other and just trying to kind of make the ensemble work in a really limited way, like just between 5 people. But, you know, the problem is more that like there will be a timbral imbalance, right? So just like certain timbres, like, you know, you can balance everything out dynamically, but the actual quality of the timbre is not going to balance as much as it could, right? So that's the danger here in, like, say, driving the flute all the way down to its lowest possible notes, you know, against that kind of thick middle texture. And like here's a place where you see like it's great that there's bass clarinet in this, but then like here's where like horn would have been really, really invaluable, right? It would have freed certain things up and solved a lot of problems. You know, like you could have had the clarinet trading off with the horn, and so on. And then you could have had like the clarinet taking the lower notes of the flute, right? So there are a bunch of things that kind of would work out better with a more standard ensemble. But all the same, this is just really fun. I mean, I just really love the way that I love the way that that these problems were attempted to be solved in
Thomas,
this last page.
What about transposing the flute part up an octave, even though it's not precisely based on the original? Would that
Sure.
help?
I mean, it has a kind of a. I mean, you do hear that in some transcriptions like this, and the feeling that I get, it's just sort of like when you separate out that element and just kind of having it floating above, it's a little naked. Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of like this little thing happening up there, and it tends to distract from the main point, right? You're sort of hearing this little floaty bit on top, and you know, if the whole point of it was just to maintain the function, right, then what you've done is you've maintained the function and created an element that stands on its own now, right? So
Right.
so if that's what you want, then great, right? But if you're trying to have it, like if you're trying to kind of get Gershwin's points across a little bit more, then you know, is that successful? So I mean, there are almost no wrong decisions unless like they don't work physically. But yeah, but I mean that could be one way of solving the problem, but probably not a decision I would make.
All right. Well, we can, if we want, listen to the fake version with English horn to see how it compares.
You know, I hate to be the timekeeper, but I don't know. You know, I really appreciate that, Ruben. I really do, but I think we need to keep moving on to the next
No problem.
entry.
Yeah, let's get to the next one. Who's next?
We should have a score by Britta. This is great.
Britta, are you
So
here
I
with us
really,
in the live chat? Let us know if you're here. If not, that's okay. We'll still talk about your
I
score.
did see her earlier. I don't know if she's still on with us.
okay. This is really great that this was scored to the screen dimensions. I really love it. I really appreciate everybody who did that. Why don't we hear the mock-up first before I make any comments? Okay, cool. So I think this has got some really neat ideas in it. To go back to the first page, I mean, there's really no need. I mean, there's no reason why you have to contrast. Pretty much everybody has taken that approach, and I took that approach myself, very similarly to our last score. So, you know, why can't the statement just be in the same voice twice? Because that would give the player a chance to inflect it differently, or just, you know, or maybe make it more soulful the second time or more bluesy. However, I think that it has to be marked differently if you really want to get away with that. So, and maybe mark it piano, maybe with a little bit of ritardando. All right, and then a tempo, bum 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 see, that would be my instinct there if you wanted to keep it in the same voice. So that the player themselves can contrast what they're doing rather than just saying the same thing twice. But there's nothing wrong with the way that it's scored. That's a beautiful register for the English horn, a sort of middle high register, and very, very effective. Now going on, I feel that we're sort of missing an opportunity here, Britta, and that is you've got harp sort of playing this internal stuff, this sort of kind of more pianistic kind of thing. And it is really not going to come across like it is. You're going to, I mean, you could barely hear it in the mock-up, and that's, your ears are telling you the correct thing, is this would really not come through. Like, you would have to mark it forte, and you have to mark everybody else piano or mezzo piano if you really wanted the harp to stand out. It's kind of more of a harp concerto type thing. And frankly, it's a sort of a wasted opportunity because you have plucking instruments that can sound so much more forceful. Like you've got bass and cello and other instruments that can basically play what the harp is trying to play there and cut through that, all that mid-range, right? Like, whenever the mid-range has got a lot of stuff going on in it and a lot of doubling, then the harp tends to disappear because that is like one of its most delicate registers. It's just really easily covered, just like, say, the low register of the flute. So that's why I'm saying it's sort of a missed opportunity. Like here you could, this being a challenge, you could score any way you like because we don't know that there's an orchestra that is going to play this or not, right? So this could easily have just been scored for like a full orchestral strings, and then you have all the pizzicato you would need if you wanted to take this approach that the harpist is playing there, right? I mean, it is beautiful to have harp solve problems, that are presented by a piano score, but it, like, in practice, it doesn't always work out so well. All right, but I like some of the elements that are part of this texture. Okay, I'm just going to point out one other problem here. And that is dynamic mixing. Okay, we've got mezzo forte in the bassoon, mezzo piano in the horn and trumpet, okay, mezzo forte in the cello, and then forte in the vibraphone, and then piano in the violin that comes in, right? So imagine that you're sitting in an orchestra. You've only got your part in front of you, and it has the marking like mezzo forte on it. Okay, and then the person next to you has got a mezzo piano marking or a piano marking, and you're playing very similar parts. If they come in first, you may think, well, geez, that overall level just seems to be a little quieter. Okay, so I'll just hold back a little. So you end up having everybody unifying and balancing themselves out and playing whatever they feel everybody should play, or they end up playing really out of balance because there's no sense of unified dynamics, right? So it's really better to have your accompaniment the same volume, unless like there really are imbalances between, say, like brass and strings. It's just really better to take that approach as much as possible. So like here, you could just mark everybody mezzo forte and then just have the melody instruments being playing forte or mezzo forte.
Thomas, a couple quick questions. Britta asks if it would make a difference. I think this is referring to the harp being buried if the bassoon was not playing this rhythmic figure.
Yeah, but then you lose the drive. That's the problem. Like if it's left up to the harpist to just like to drive the rhythm, it's just really a very gentle sound. It doesn't really have that kind of push. Like the bassoon in there is really the most. It's the MVP, right? Because it's really laying it down. Bum 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 bum. So you really do need that push in there. Some kind of thing has to happen there.
Right, that makes sense. And then in the cello part, alternating between pizzicato and arco, is that problematic or?
No, not at all. That's I mean there are several scores that use that approach in this challenge, which I thought was interesting. It is totally not a problem. I would say the easiest way to deal with that is just to have a whole string or have a whole string section, and then you can give the pizzicato notes to your second violinist, and you can give the arco note to your viola player, right? And then you don't have to worry about it at all, and that just you can have that kind of, you can have people just focusing on what they're doing without having to just constantly trade back and forth. But like if you just think pluck, pluck, nothing to it. Yeah, they could do that all day long.
And
But
would it make sense to have the cellos, if they were just doing that pizzicato note, also play the downbeat, say an octave below?
Well, I mean, what would make more sense to me is just to have the cellos doubling the bassoons in pizzicato, and then to have whatever else is needed there in terms of doubling or reinforcing parts in the brass, or other parts of the up part of the rhythm, be divided between other instruments. And then that gives you more, like the strings can contribute more anyways. I mean, that would be one way to solve, but that's just my idea. That's not Britta's idea, right? So it's
Right.
not really valid for me to inject myself into the score and say, oh, do this and do that, right? But I'm just saying, the ways that you can get some of those same effects by just using a standard orchestra, rather than these really reduced string parts. The biggest problem on this page is really the vibraphone. Okay, and here's another way in which the mock-up is telling you the truth rather than telling you, being subjective, and that is it's quite soft. And vibraphone is not really the loudest instrument in the world. So one way of dealing with this that you could do, Britta, is just like, you have your opening bum, 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 you do that for 4 bars and then just drop down to piano, right? Just the whole orchestra just drops down to piano. And then you have, ba-da-da, bum, da-da-da, dun-dun, with the vibes, and they can, you don't have to worry about the balance there, right? And I really love the little bits of violin added, and then the violin coming in, dovetailing into bar 9. Okay, that's really cool. So that would be one way of letting your, just highlighting the vibes a little bit more, right? And then we've got sort of the English horn. I feel that there are some missing slurs there towards the end of the page in the English horn part. It's because, like, you've got da 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 da. I kind of feel like there's no dynamic given to that part, to that to the re-entrance. Is it still forte? Is it mezzo forte? What is the dynamic there, right? So kind of like the conductor would want to know, and so would the soloist, because it's they're carrying the melody there. And also I feel like just there needs to be more expressive nuance and so on and so forth. You've got crescendos there, but your melody instrument is not crescendoing, right? So how does that make sense? So you just have to, and then you've also got, you're going, you have a very strange marking here. Last bar of that screen, vibraphone, you have a note, and then you've got an accent with a decrescendo after it, right? So like the vibraphonist has no way of making their tone bar diminuendo after they've hit it, right? So they hit it, so like there's nothing, the diminuendo mark doesn't mean anything, right? There's nothing that they can do about that, right? So if the next note on the next page is intended to be softer, then that is just what it is. So that just has to be like what we would call a terrace dynamic, right? So we just mark the next thing mezzo forte, and don't worry about the having to say, oh, this is softer, by the way. Okay, well, I really like the bassoon melody here. And then you come in with a reinforcing octave, like, and the bassoonist isn't allowed to sort of finish their, so it's kind of strange. You're kind of going like this, and then the violin comes over the top, and there's no more lower voice. So that might not work in practice. Okay. It's just like the dropout is going to feel like it disconnects the music or disconnects the theme. Okay. Now you've got the cello coming in right after that. So kind of taking over from where the bassoon would be an octave lower, right? So what if the cello came in? What if you had more strings, right? So what if you had more strings? Your double basses are doing what the cello's doing, maybe an octave lower, and then you have your bassoons descending, then your violin comes in and dovetails, and then the cello comes in and dovetails right after that, right? So that would be a way of connecting all of this together a little bit more cohesively. But the way that it is now just really feels like it disconnects it just feels a little disjointed of like where we're leading things, right? Because like Gershwin is leading us down, right? He's just like really wants to finish this idea and then go, right? Because he's like, it's almost like he's playing games with us, right? So it's great that the cello ends up that way, but it just feels a little disconnected with the violin. And you know, you didn't need to, if there was concern of the bassoonist running out of breath, that is not a concern, right? So if that's why that they've got a rest there, is that you're worried that they would have breath for that mezzo piano low B flat. That's not a concern. Because they're going to be taking.
What about the jump down to?
Yeah, that is not a big deal. You know,
right.
You know, and then not a big deal at all. It's a very agile instrument. I like the brass scoring in here. It's all really, really fun. Here is where like the harp, once again, is not really doing what you need it to do. If all that stuff were were scored an octave higher, then some of it would come through. But like the way that it is kind of scored is a little bit interfering, and it makes the last two bars of this entry more cluttered than they should be, right? There's kind of more voices going on there than are really necessary. You know, other than that, it's a really great score, really, really enjoyable, and just such great, you know, just the more people do things that I would never have imagined, the happier I am. So like this kind of scoring makes me feel really happy. You know, I mean, it's, I mean, I think it would take a little bit more work to get it ready for the stands, but it's still like, it just really has some fun ideas. Were there any?
Well said. It's got some really.
Any questions
Okay.
from the?
I'm not
from
seeing anything
RP?
that you haven't already covered. A couple minor
Okay.
things, but yeah, largely we're right on track. Yeah.
Okay. All
Shall we
righty.
go to the next?
Well, that's pretty much all I had to say about that.
Mhm.
All right, so we're starting to get into the massive, massive scoring. Okay, so I'm just going to preface this by saying I feel that this shows a real understanding for Gershwin's approach to orchestration. I was just very, I just felt that, I mean, there's still some stuff to work out, but I felt that it was, you know, it was among all of these entries, it was the one that sounded the most like Gershwin had a crack at orchestrating, or, you know, could have been a sketch. So let's have a listen to that before I blab on. Yeah, so just really, you know, very, very focused. Overall critique that I would say is, and it is really not a valid critique in this particular venue, but I feel that the scoring of that second page that we just heard is the way that Gershwin would have ended a piece, right? Bringing in, you know, bring in the xylophone, you know, like just like that, the intensity, the massiveness of the scoring would be kind of like page, like the last page, not the first page, right? So, but I mean, it doesn't really matter in terms of this challenge because of course, like the orchestrator wants to show me what they can do and if I have any advice on it. So, you know, so it's kind of like the ending page of on the second page. All right, so let's go back to the beginning. Okay. All right, so Wei Jun, I really, really enjoyed your score, as you can tell. Just, you know, I mean, actually pretty much equally enjoyed everybody's score, but like certain things sort of stand out for me as an orchestrator as well. So um, I think it's interesting to have the contrast of timbres, you know, flute, solo flute at the beginning, and then harmon mute, first trumpet, in the same octave. But you know what, like that, you can also get that kind of effect on trombone as well. You know, the trombone could have been answering an octave lower, right? Or you could have had your clarinet an octave higher and then your trumpet as written, right? So those are also possibilities to get more contrast. I really like the fact that you have them marked dynamically differently, right? Like, you know, forte and then mezzo forte. That's really, really cool. And, you know, they're both great registers for both of those instruments, you know, but yeah, but maybe if the clarinet were an octave higher or it was answered by like, you know, like say maybe trombone, harmon mute. Okay. Okay, and then just the overall scoring here of this first page, maybe if we could do like have from the clarinets down to the basses in terms of the view. Okay, so yeah, so it's like it's a nice big Gershwin tutti, okay, and like everything is pretty much placed in a very comfortable position. There's a lot of film approach to this, like, you know, like stacking the horns in, you know, in order of number rather than in their concert order, which is to have the third be the second middle high part. You'd want to fix that if this were performed as a concert piece. You know, you got your trombones, so trombones and horns, and then clarinets and bassoons. And like, and then of course, like the strings adding in. Okay, so look, you do like this is also a kind of a film approach that I've seen in some film scores, is to list the number of string players that you want. That's really not necessary in a concert score. All you have to do is just say first violins, second violins, you know, violas, cellos, blah blah blah. Right, that's all you have to do. And if you really want divisi on the violas like that, then fine. But yeah, I mean, it's really kind of not necessary. So yeah, so it's all, you know, everything is in a nice strong register in there. There's like nothing about that really is out of balance. In fact, looks like Wei Jun has gone to the trouble of balancing his instruments really nicely here. That low note in the harp right at bar 3 is not going to be audible. Pizzicato in, you've got your 6 double basses. You know, you could, I mean, there are ways of dividing up the strings so you have more cellos at the beginning, right? So like some of these violins could be playing double stops and getting just as much sound out of them, and that would just leave all of your cellos to be playing that, you know, bum 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 kind of thing, and then all of your basses could just be hitting that low B flat, right? And that is what it would take to balance with the tuba, right? So like the tuba is just really going to cut through, boom, you're going to feel it. An accented note below the staff on tuba, actually it hits you in the chest just like a bass drum, right? You feel that. That's part of the charm of the tuba, is that you feel that, the force of projection. Okay, so you just going to need a little bit more firepower in your double basses. So that's what I would say, just kind of reorganizing the pitches in the strings will give you a more balanced approach. But otherwise, other than that, I don't really take issue with the way that this is scored. It's all nicely balanced and will work really, really great. And then you've got your glissando. Let's go to the next page. Glissando for harp going up to that high note up there, C sharp, to start off our melodic statement. Okay. So there's also something I want you to think about. Just, you have divided functions for everybody, and that's all fair. In a sort of a format like this, if you were able to maybe just have like places where there are staves where there are two voices on a staff, like you could have done that with the flutes and just have it like by the third bar of this page go to a place where like it was first flute for the first half of the bar and then second flute for the second half, like done in first and second voice. And say same thing with clarinets and trombones and trumpets. Then the staff size of the music can get bigger, and that's easier not just on me and everybody else in reading this on the screen, but it's also easier for the conductor. Like if this is an actual piece of music, like they don't have to get out their magnifying glass to see what's going on, right? So if you can double up parts on a staff just the way that it is in a concert score, that means that it's going to be more time for you to be extracting parts, but the trade-off is just better readability. Anyway, even in a part like, if we look at like bars 11 to 14 in the clarinets, you can see that like that could have just been done as two voices really, really easily, right? So it's clearer in two separate staves, but it's it's doable as one staff, and then you just reduce the visual clutter of the score. All right. Okay. So if it's possible, Reuven, to have both pages up, both bars 7 through 14. Okay, yeah, and then just maybe just a little bit of an increase. We can lose the last couple of bars. I know it's kind of hard to read, so that's another problem too. All right, so so the approach here, let's just deal with the melody. We've got strings, we've got violins and octaves on that second page. The flutes are doubling them, and there's really no need, like you do this thing in the third bar where like first flute plays and then second flute plays. There's really no need to do that. They could both be playing continuing on. And I see what you're doing here is you're kind of easing off and moving to different colors. So on that particular, from that particular perspective, that's totally acceptable. You're going like you've got everybody playing together. You've got oboes and clarinets, oboe and first clarinet playing the doubling the second violins, and of course like that's also being doubled by the trumpets. Okay, and then you've got sort of the mixed colors going forward, so that's fine. But it's like, if it's just a matter of easing off some of the tone color, then that's not really needed. But if you are moving to another tone color, then that's fine, because it's really nice the way that you end up with clarinet, like by the fourth bar, bar 10, you end up with like cor anglais and second clarinet and trumpet, kind of all doubling together with all the violins playing at once. And I like the way that you kind of avoid losing the octave there. It's like it all telescopes together very nicely. So you kind of starting off in octaves and then ending up on a single line. It's less perceptible to the ear. I also like the fact that you don't overdo it on the xylophone. You just kind of do it for a couple of bars. But like the xylophone is just really like the nuclear option. It just brings so much force and so much intensity into the music. That's one of the reasons why I was saying that this really felt like the last page rather than the first page. If you were going to go ahead and score this all the way through, which I hope you do, just for your own, your own edification and possibly even to have an orchestra play it, I would say have a nice strong page here, page 2, okay, but not as strong as you've scored it here. So like page 1 is all good, okay, but like for page 2, ease off a little bit and then use this huge forceful approach for the end. And it's just all basically scored out for you, just having such a fat sound, like maybe even bring in the trombones in a more melodic context here. That would be, but like xylophone is probably a little premature in terms of like the, just like starting this work off. Like as far as the accompaniment of this page, it's actually, once again, it's pretty nicely balanced. The only thing that I would feel is that the you really are dividing up the basses and the cellos, bum 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 bum. It's probably better for the cellos and the basses to work together the same way that the like second bassoon is working, right? Because I really feel that there's a little bit of a disconnect between the bottom note, right, that low B flat, and then the bum bum kind of thing going on. It would be nice to have one instrument really carrying it, like that second bassoon, but like all the cellos, playing a version of that. Of course, obviously they can't reach that low B flat, but they could play the B flat above it. So you have the octave, and then you have F, F. So I think that there's more that you could be doing with the strings in this particular context. And I'm noticing like you've got these arrows like going to divisi, and then you've got the arrow at the end, let's bar 7 in the violas, and then bar 10 going to unison on a single staff. And it's better just to mark these as on the same staff. Once again, save vertical space and just have your divisi on a single staff, unless the parts are really doing intricately different things, right? Just, save some vertical space. Okay, so the only other thing to mention on those like bars 7 through 10 is the role of the harp. It's all very cinematic, very Hollywood. There's just upward. I think that it gets to be a little much towards the end there. It's just like I think it's a few too many in a row, just frankly speaking. But after a while, like if you continue to, you have a situation where the melody is coming down into the middle range very strongly, and you are keeping those glissandos in the middle range, they're just going to get buried anyways. So you might as well just, leave them out, I would say. Okay, so now let's look at the last 4 bars, 11 through 14. If we can just move the screen over there, Ruben. Here we've got a situation where the clarinets are doubling up with the marimba and sort of trading off, and so on. Okay, so that is going to work, but you just have to make sure everything is balanced. Okay, so far it's looking great. The harp is probably unnecessary. That'd be better off as pizzicato notes from the cellos or double basses. Frankly speaking, they just really, you've got these you've got this lovely idea to double the last note of each of those groups played by the marimba as a harp harmonic. But that is the kind of thing that is really more of a chamber music scoring thing. Okay, in an orchestral context, in a big hall, that's going to get lost. It's just too delicate of a sound. Okay. Anyways, I just feel, maybe I'm wrong, but my sense is that it would be really hard to hear. what you intend to do there. So I
For
think that there's heart and mind.
film scoring, we sometimes get spoiled by the ability of spot
That's right.
matching
That's right.
instruments.
And yeah, and something everybody should be aware of. I probably should have said this at the very beginning. I'm really evaluating everything from a concert scoring. I'm looking and seeing what is possible on a stage, right? So that's where my expertise comes from. But yeah, you're totally right. That could be mixed and and would sound fine. Okay. I like the fact that you sort of hold back on your horns a little bit. They could be a little bit softer there since they're playing over the same range as the marimba. I would actually bring them down to piano. But I love the pizzicato in your violas and violins. I think that that's very effective. And just everything else is works pretty well. The bassoons and the tuba, little notes on timpani, that's all going to work pretty nicely. So that's my general impression about it is, don't give away too much at the beginning. Really make sure that you've got things balanced if you're bringing in a marimba. Think about the texture of things when you're dealing with the harp, and otherwise really a great score. Just some great ideas and really nicely Gershwinish approach to certain things.
It's a wonderful score. And while Reuven pulls up the next one, one thing that stood out to me that we didn't really discuss was the handing off the parts. Da da da, second player. Da da da, da da da, da da. It's an intangible. It doesn't make that much musical difference, but it makes a difference in player morale. That orchestration will be really fun to play. And if you compose like that in general, like across other pieces you write, you'll find that your players, like, they look forward to playing with you, and they'll play with a little extra gusto because it's just so interesting. I mean, this piece we're discussing right now, it's like a cat and mouse piece. It's like predecessor to Tom and Jerry, that kind of rapid fire idea scoring. So there's something to be said for, like, hey, throw these players a bone and make it a little fun for them. And I think you did
Sure.
that in this orchestration. I love that.
Well, so like trading off is great on little bits and pieces. Just make sure don't give too much responsibility to the second player because they're working on their real estate license. So okay, so like they often like just have a certain set amount of time, whereas like the first has got like they're practically like, let's say in a community regional situation, they're practically like a contract player for a big orchestra, so they have tons of time. They're being paid very well for it. Sometimes the second player does not have the same level of pay and the same level of time to prepare things. So like if you get Dvorak with your second players, now he would give his second players like take over the first part. Just trading off is cool. Don't overdo it. Read my tip. I think it's tip number 2 in the book. Actually, it talks about second players, the role of second players, and that's actually on. You can actually read that as a free preview on Orchestration Online, talking about the role of second players.
Well said.
So, unless there are any other questions from the from our comments on that,
I think we covered most of it. Let's move on.
Doesn't look like it.
All right.
All right. So here is Alvaro's piece.
All right. Let's just go straight into the mock-up for this. Okay, very cool. All right, so, all right. There is a lot to talk about, okay? But the first thing I'm going to point out are just a few things that probably work fine in terms of a mock-up, but don't really work notationally, all right? So at the beginning, we've got this muted strings easing in, and then the music starting. So that has got to be in a concert score, that has got to be expressed as a separate bar before the music starts. So it can't be a situation where you just give the string section of fermata and say, I just start a little early, right? So that's what happened in the mock-up. So that has, if you want to start before the downbeat in a concert situation, you've got to have a separate bar. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is that we've got da-da-dum bum bum, right? We've got that big fermata going all the way through, except what's going on in the harp part. You know, you're going da 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 da. You know, like the harpist is like does not have a fermata. They don't know where to stop, right? They're going to see the conductor bring everything to a halt on you know, that sort of second and a quarter beat, right? And then they're not going to know how to finish that little pattern because you haven't given them any clues in terms of fermata going on. So this might have been a situation where you intended to like get rid of that second group, that second beam group for the harp, and just have them do what was going on in the second bar. So if that was just something you forgot, that's cool. All right, so those are two things that kind of leap out that immediately would be a problem. Also, you need to put a fermata on your trombones in the second bar. Okay, so that those are just like some playing things. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about that tuba part, right? You got a low B flat, okay, which is really like you're going to need a double B flat bass tuba to get that low note. So there's an actual tip in my book about like, don't worry about the tuba, just like write whatever note that you feel like, you know, but like here's an exception, right? Is really, if you start getting below C, you've got to have the right equipment. So it's really better to have like one of those big band low B flat tubas. And not everybody has got them, right? And it's a profound note. Remember I was talking about before how like a tuba note can just really kick you in the chest like a bass drum. Okay, so here's an example of that. That is just a rock solid, you know, just low as possible. It is going to be below everything else in that entire orchestra, and it is going to cut through, right? So it's not going to get swallowed by what's above it at all.
Kareem has a slightly different description of that. He calls it the farting tuba register.
Okay, well, not so farty if you've got if you have the heavy equipment, you know, it can really come through a lot clearer. That's part of the, you know, the less compromises and the more pressure there's on the player, then the clearer the sound can be, but it's still not necessarily ideal. Anyway, but yeah, so that note is possible, but it's just like, it's going to require the right kind of tuba, and it also is going to just really, you know, it's really going to dominate the sound there. So I would say like there's nothing wrong with it being an octave higher, with doubling the third trombone, and, you know, just taking that off the table, that low B flat off the table, I think. And, you know, in a practical situation, if the guy has just got an F, he'll just play it an octave higher, and you might not never even notice unless you're really listening. So anyhow, but yeah, just like things like a lot of these really low notes are possible on smaller tubas, but they just have less coherence, right? But I really didn't want to get into that. We've already got that note on the contrabassoon, so it's like that's really all that's needed. I mean, that they are going to be just perfect on that very bottom end. I like the way everything is scored here. Like if you intend it to be extremely heavy and thick, then that is totally fine. There's like there isn't a lot of empty space in there. There's just a lot of really kind of focused heavy sounds in there. And and it's really, the top end of it is really bright. You've got your 3 trumpets, and you've got them sort of meshing into the to your flutes and oboes and everything else. So that, so pretty much those first 2 bars work, and I could just talk about them for an hour, but I better move on. So, but it's just like, so long as that sound is really what's wanted, then that will work fine. So moving on, the last marking that the strings had by the time we get to the 3rd bar was forte. So we're assuming that they're still forte, and then the bassoons and contrabassoons, mezzo forte. That's a good balance, but we don't have any balance going on in the brass, right? I don't know, like, I'm assuming that the last thing that they played was forte. So that has got to be brought down. You could even like ease off. You could give the accents to your bassoonists and string players and just do staccatos instead of accents for your brass. And then that'll be a lot cleaner, right? And you still get the same punch, but you don't have the brass taking over and just making everybody else just like unnecessary, right? That's the danger there. So that all eases back. You're actually only going down a teeny little bit to mezzo forte by the time we get to the next double bar, the bar 7. Okay, and there we got the entrance of clarinet and harp. So pretty much throughout this entire thing, I think you could just basically just throw away the harp, because like the harp is just not going to make it's not going to be heard at all, right? So like you got this beautiful bright clarinet note an octave higher than your harp part, and it's like nobody's going to hear that harp, because like in the middle register of the harp, it really has to be, I mean, and you've also got it marked so that the harp is very soft and your clarinet is loud, so it's kind of dispensable. Maybe these were notes that were left over from sort of taken out of the piano part or something, I don't know. But yeah, but here we have a nice balance between the brass accompaniment, those 4 bars of brass accompaniment, and the strings. I feel that works really, really nicely. This is kind of what I was saying before. I would say, like, don't even worry, like if they're playing piano, don't even worry about the accents. Maybe it'd be better just to have staccato in your heavy brass and lower horns, right? Okay, now, clarinets, very high, then flutes, I love this little game. Oboes, and then kind of jumping down to first trumpet, and then English horn, and then taken up by the horns, bum, bum, bum. That's really effective. So I would say you need to balance it out, because the horns are going to come in too strong. So I would mark your brass melodies as mezzo forte, right? So you've got clarinet loud, flute loud, oboe loud, and then picked up by the trumpets, mezzo forte, first trumpet mezzo forte, and then English horn trading off with first horn. That could also be forte to mezzo forte, and then you'll get a better balance of functions. Everything else there is great. So pretty much the whole approach to this score is great. It's just like fine tuning it, right? All right. So, okay, so if you're going to do that with your piccolo, as I've said before, we're kind of heading into a weaker register for the piccolo, like once we get into the staff, below the staff. Yeah, I mean, this is where the first flute is going to be the strongest here. So if you want that folk flute kind of sound of the middle and lower register, then what you've got to just strip away everybody else in the orchestra. They have got to be, they have got to be barely accompanying, but that's not what you want. Because if we look at everything else, you got, forte, unison violins, and like the violas come in to help out. You've got like trumpets and horns trading off. You've got bassoons, like in like the second clarinet. All this stuff is happening underneath that piccolo. So unless you put the piccolo an octave higher, which really is going to give it a huge, powerful kind of a feeling, if you really just want that register to be played by a flute-like instrument, then it's got to be first flute, right? It just, you'll lose the kind of folk flute kind of a feeling to it, which is a shame, because like lower flute has this wonderful, I mean, it really translates across a lot of different cultures. You know, there some Latin American music, you hear like kind of that lower piccolo sound, or, you know, kind of has the wooden flute kind of thing, which is really similar to Eastern European. You hear that in some of Stravinsky's scoring. You know, he'll use lower piccolo to kind of imitate folk flutes, and then same thing is happening like Rimsky-Korsakov and Debussy and Ravel. Same exact idea, right? So if that is what is intended here, you've got way too much weight. So all you need is a single flute, or even flutes A2, and then you have that force, right? You have what you need there. Okay, but just talking about everything else, that's kind of cool. You've got first trumpet and first trombone doubling the violins. You're not going to really hear the violins there, right? Like, unless you double them themselves with the seconds. Then you've got third horn plus bassoon, plus, you know, they're doubling all the violins. Here you kind of hear the violins a little bit stronger now. Okay, first horn plus tuba, right? Playing pretty high up there. I would say, like, you really need to put a slur mark on that tuba, because it's not gonna, you know, you're asking them to go ba-da-da-da-dum, and it's just really it's gonna be distracting there. Okay, so those are all going, that doubling is very, very cool, and it is going to work. And then third horn with second clarinet, that is going to work great. Okay, then suddenly you have this fortissimo happening with your strings. So if that was intended to just really jump out there, you know, and then you've got the really strong accompaniment of everybody else, then I think that will work great. And then, like, I'm not going to comment on the very last bar, because I think that was just kind of stuck in there just to kind of finish things off. Okay. But once again, I don't think you need that rock bottom B flat from tuba. You've already got your contrabassoon. That's powerful enough. You know, just like really, you want the push at the bottom there, but like that low B flat forte, I'm assuming, like there's really incomplete dynamics on some of this. I'm assuming that's forte. That's really gonna be a huge kind of foghorn kind of a sound down there. So that's a step farther than I would go. But I like the way that the bassoons, third bassoon and contrabassoon playing octaves there. I think that's very, very effective, because you've got all the strings combining on that little ba-da-da-dum. So it really does need some support there. But I don't think it needs the rock bottom tuba. Sorry, I'm just gonna close this door. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on this piece.
Rock band, rock bottom tuba.
Anyway, but yeah, so that's my deconstruction of this. I think it pretty much, pretty much works. I'm a little puzzled. I think that this is there's like an ottava bassa mark over the second clarinet part. I don't quite understand that. Usually that's a marking you put under an instrument, and then the intends for it to be down, but like there's no reason why this couldn't have just been scored as a middle C and then a G leading to the other part. So I don't understand that, but maybe that was just a stray marking that kind of got stuck in there from someplace else.
Alvaro says it was for space reasons, so I think that's meant to be an octave down. Just
all right.
Wasn't real.
Okay. Alrighty. Any other questions on this from Alvaro?
think we covered it, just pretty much
Yeah.
everything there. That's
Okay.
highly imaginative. This is a wonderful orchestration.
It is. Yeah. It's got some really great colors. I mean, yeah, pretty much everything works, but like, I'm just kind of picking it apart and, being the orchestration coach rather rather than, rather than Alex Ross or anything like that. And, giving it thumbs up or thumbs down for the New Yorker.
Alvaro says he has a quick question, which is he's in the progress of writing. Kareem says, careful with some of the bass trombone pedal tones at the end, unless you want the Gershwin Zimmer version.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that low F, that is pretty big. It's probably the kind of thing that will, if you've got we're talking about third bar from the end. If you're talking about that low F at the very end of the bar, the cellos and double basses are going to convey the meaning there, especially as doubled by the bassoon and contrabassoon. So there's really no need for the bass trombone to really go down to that low F. It could just play an octave. I mean, the note is possible, but it is big. It is really, really big. Yeah, and it's just a mezzo forte thing in there. So I would say just kind of maybe ease off on it. It's a really good point, Kareem.
Laura's asking about the trills at bar 1 on the low register of the high woodwinds. I'm not seeing. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that little C sharp trill. Yeah, that's going to be like, yeah. Yeah, like I said, I didn't want to take apart these first two bars because there's a lot to say. I mean, yeah, probably the second flute part should be up an octave, or just get rid of that and just play A2 with the first flute would probably be better. And then if you really want that trill, it should be done by one of the clarinets. That would be my sense.
Nice. Well, shall we move on to the last of our
Okay, did we get to Alvaro's last question?
We talked about the trill just a little bit, yeah.
Okay, that was his question. All right.
And
Okay.
then Dell asks about grace notes on trombone. Would those be slurred by necessity?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. If you can, pretty much anything that you can slide up is probably an easy grace note. We're talking about, yeah. So I think that's workable. And I think there were glissandos in the second bar. So long as Alvaro has worked out the slide positions, then I don't see anything that is too difficult. That's too weird.
All right. Well, let's move on to the last and final version then.
Yes. All right. So once again, scope is my decider here on this. I feel like John Lennon being asked to sing "Twist and Shout" at the end of the recordings, their first recording session of the Beatles. Okay. All right. Well, let's listen to this so I can rest my throat. Okay. All right. Well, that was George. You snuck in a few extra bars past our limit, but that's all right. That's all right. Okay. So let's go back to page 1. Okay. I think we missed a few fermatas there at the beginning. Da-da-dum, bum, bum, right? Da-da-dum, bum, bum. Once again, we've got question and answer. The more forceful instrument going to the less forceful instrument of clarinet, sort of kind of reversing what we saw in a score before. Trumpet taking up the first statement, and then like the first clarinet. Now you've got sforzando piano to fortissimo. That is going to stick out so much. It's going to stick out so much more than you imagine, George. You know, okay. So I mean, that's what you want there, but it's like it would be better for the player to come in on the second semiquaver of that group. Right? And you know, you don't even need you don't need another player to do this. I don't know why you have to have that. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's exciting to have the trumpet in the second bar to really push, but like clarinets can push on that A flat, even though it's in the throat tones, and they can make it piercingly loud. So you could just have one player cover everything. So, you know, trumpet. That could all be done on the first trumpet. And then right on your first clarinet. So that could all be done. I mean, yeah, it's not going to be as huge, but you do want a contrast, right? We want these to be distinguishably separate things, right? Not necessarily the same voice. But yeah, anyways, all good. So then we get to the bum, bum, bum. So once again, we have pizzicato, arco. So pluck, arco, pluck, arco. That's all workable, okay? Just as long as it isn't done too much. However, the balance is not necessarily copacetic across all your instruments. Like you start off with pizzicato with your strings and arco, but like you have forte for your brass, and you know that is all you're going to hear, right, with this kind of scoring. And then you have your winds come in, the same idea. They're going forte to mezzo forte. It doesn't matter that you've got every single wind instrument in there, because the brass are so strong that they are just going to dominate everything. Okay, so you know, and you're going all the way up to like that high G in the by bar 6 in the trumpets. So you know, so that it's just really the sound picture there is going to be very, very much dominated by brass. So here's the place where M means moderate, right? So forte is great for your pizzicato strings, mezzo forte for your brass, and that just will solve all your problems immediately. And also, why does the brass need to be staccato? Why does the brass need to be accented? It does not actually really. You know, you could, you know, you want that bum bum ba dun dun. You could actually put in a tenuto there instead of an accent, right? So that would just give the length to the note, right? Bum bum ba bum bum bum, and leave it up to the arco strings to add the accent. You already have a tenuto accent there, right? So that way you can kind of ease off on the power of the brass, and they don't have to, you know, just punch everybody over the head so much, right? And I mean, it's then the color of your winds come in, and they're beautiful, they're effective, they're not fighting the brass so much, and they're complementing, they're bringing out the color of the strings more as a blend, right? So I would just say, yeah, once again, just bring it back. Okay, so going forwards from there, we kind of have some of the same shenanigans. Da-da-dum, bum, bum. You got the same sforzando piano crescendo in your fourth horn and first trumpet. So it's a little showy, you know. It's like it's going to kind of distract from but like once again, just if you have to do that, start on the second 16th note of the second group rather than right on the second beat. So I'm not really sure about like you have violin and then you have violin 1, violin 2. Maybe that's like, you know, doesn't really get used. It's kind of like maybe a solo violin part that you had intended, or just an extra bar that you didn't delete. Anyhow, no matter. You could have gotten rid of that. If you got rid of that and you got rid of the harp staves, which you're not even using, then vertically we would be able to see more, right? At a higher resolution. Yeah, same thing with second trumpet, doesn't do anything, right? So yeah, so think about these things just in general with these challenges. Okay, so let's talk about the treatment of the melody, da-da-dum, bum bum, which is by first and second violins. Okay, and then we have octaves with the viola and second violin, ba-da-dum, bum bum, with the first trumpet doubling the violas, which, you know, they're probably gonna, I mean, that's not the most, you'll still hear a blend, but it's not like it's not a comfortable blend. It's going to be sort of edgy, you know, the trumpet being really in the foreground against the violas. Like one instrument that really blends great with violas at that register is clarinet, right? Clarinet does not, I mean, its high partials don't, they're still there, but they don't fight the viola for dominance. But the trumpet does, because it has very similar overtones. It has a, just go look at the book. It's kind of interesting the way that you can track the octaves and fifths of these spikes in the basic harmonic spectrum of the trumpet. You just really see the you know, where all of those really high partials stand out. So that will tell you right away that, you know, anything that is similar to that in the strings will get canceled out. All right. Yeah, but you've got some of the similar sort of sforzando piano push in your sort of first clarinet and bass clarinet. Kind of a cool idea. Then your winds come in on bar 9, and kind of a massive like unison right there in bar 9. 2 flutes, oboe, and 2 clarinets, and it has a real band sound to it, doesn't it? Like in the mock-up, and it will in real life too. Just like it really sounds like you know, like a concert band bar right in there. So I mean, that's cool. If you want that effect, that's great. I mean, and that's all over whole planets as well, which is something that players, they, you know, concert players try not to sound band-like when they're playing the planets, when they've got like A3 flutes and A3 or A2 clarinets, like all playing the same melody. They try to kind of moderate things so that there's very little difference in intonation, just so it really has this very beautiful pure sound as much as they can get. But like in kind of just a normal concert situation, not a lot of time to read your score. People have got to just do it, and you know, they're not going to finesse it as much as, and you'll get that concert sound. All right. Okay, and then you've got the we've got this wonderful unison there at the very end there in bar 10 with the strings. Ba-da-ba-ba-bum-bum. Well, that all works really, really good. I think that what's nice about this is that, you know, you're using the articulations for the most part as ways of expressing meaning in the melody line, and that's pretty strong. So before we get off of this page, just want to say that, you know, the accompaniment is extremely simple here. It's just horns and double bass, arco, and bassoon family instruments. That is all going to work fine, and it just keeps it, you know, it's almost like a pianistic sound, really, just to make it that simple. So that's all going to work fine, no problems there. Okay, now if we kind of slide over to the next page, okay, so here we run into a few little problems. Violins and violas, okay, that's all works great. And then on trombones, you want to go, okay, that's going to be a little less exact. I mean, it's a really cool idea, and in the mock-up, it came through in a really wild way. But you know, I feel that if you're going to use that one, it's kind of like having like this really fancy vocabulary word like obstreperous, right? Like the word obstreperous. So if you're like listing like all of these different little motives that are dancing around the orchestra, like first, you know, going from the middle strings to the trombones to the trumpets and the bassoons, right? So when I see the way that you constructed this, it's sort of like saying, you know, how are you feeling today? Well, I was feeling sad, I was feeling obstreperous, and I was feeling a little hungry and a little tired. Like, wait, go back to that second one again. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like a $10 word, and you're just throwing it in there. What if it was the last thing that you said? What if it was violins, trumpet, bassoon, clarinets, and then trombone? Got it? Right? So I think it's too special to just throw it away like that, right? I really like the timpani, like underpinning all of that, kind of playing octaves with the bassoon and so on. That's really nice. You could have brought it in a little earlier, you know, like maybe like playing you know, just one bar earlier, and then the next note, and then diminuendo, and not to mezzo piano, to piano. Okay, and then that's a little bit more balanced. But yeah, but everything else, all the little dums are really nicely put together. And the little grace notes and everything, and the accompaniment and the winds, it's all fine. So what I felt was like the strongest part of this whole orchestration, what really leaped out for me was the pizzicato. Bum, 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 bum. That was really, really cool. I just felt that really caught my attention, and it made it worth for me to sort of break the rules and allow me to comment on the last 3 bars, which are not a part of the challenge, and just to say that like the horns and the bassoon, and then the clarinet rising out of it, that idea works really cool and does not need any extra orchestration on it. Okay. So anyway, so that was my impression of your piece, George, and just like a few things that you could fix, and you know, just like some of the other people that I've encouraged along this, you know, this is worth orchestrating all the way through and seeing if you'll get an orchestra to do a reading of it. Okay, but just fix it up a little bit, all right?
Yeah, great job, everybody. On that last thing you said, Thomas, as we wrap up, you mentioned earlier today that you've done orchestrations of the first one or all of them. Were they ever published? Were they ever performed? Are they available?
I've orchestrated the set. I have not made it available. I just want to really make sure about permissions before I publish it. But maybe in 3 or 4 years, things in the late 20s will become completely public domain. Is that
You are correct. Rhapsody in
Yeah.
Blue from 1925 just hit public domain, and this would be
Yeah.
2 or 3 years beyond that.
Yeah, so in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, I probably will publish the my version of the wind quintet, my wind quintet version of this. Yeah, I mean, it was just something just done for love, and also, you know, just to see my wife work out, and you know, it had a few rips in it, and had like a chromatic, like this big chromatic scale that goes through the end of the first piece. And yeah, I mean, there's just there's so many cool lines that, and you know, you can divide up this music that just seems so chordal into separate functions that just come across beautifully in the mixture of timbres that you get from wind quintet. So yeah, someday. Thanks for reminding me that's a possibility. I just completely never think about publishing.
Yeah, that's one reason we really want to take a look at the Rhapsody in Blue. It's now public domain, at least in the U.S. It may vary a little bit overseas, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, there's a lot more we can do with it now. So
Yeah.
any last comments? I'll do a quick wrap up, but is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, just to basically say that, you know, I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to, because like I was originally, as you probably remember, I wanted to like take something completely, you know, written for the piano, so written for the piano that it's actually called For the Piano by Debussy, and orchestrate a few bars of that. And you talked me out of it and talked me into doing the Gershwin, and it really took me a few months to kind of get used to the idea. And now I'm really glad that it was that instead of the Debussy. So good instincts there.
Well,
And
Debussy would have been fantastic, and we may
yeah,
yet do it in the future. The
yeah,
only reason we turned it down is because we've done extensive studies of Debussy. Last year, we did La Mer, a lot of it, and we've done Ravel before that. So we were just looking for some variety, but we can
sure,
definitely
sure.
swing back around to it. I love the Pour Le Piano suite. It's
Yeah, yeah.
wonderful.
I feel I mean, it's a really orchestral use of the piano, right? You know,
It
there's
sure
so
is.
many colors, there's so many textures. It's just a really wonderful piece, and it has such impact on the ears.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
sort of like it's as impactful for its time as I think like maybe the Moonlight Sonata would have been 100 years before. You know, I think
Mhm.
it has that same kind of power. But yeah, but the only other thing to really say is to thank you, David, and thank you, Ruben, for hosting me on your really great show, and for all the entrants for all the work they put into it, and and once again, just like to say that like my critiques of your scores, my comments are meant to make you a stronger orchestrator. They're not meant to criticize you personally in any way. What I'm hoping is that you'll take any advice that I've got to say and that you will improve and get better, and you'll have, and even if you find out that, like, if you feel that I'm wrong, like really back that up and learn something from that too, just like proving me wrong. That I think that's just as important as proving me right or using my advice. So that's, it's all good. It doesn't matter if you agree with me or not, but just to let you know, that's my insight as a working orchestrator. And and it's really great to share it in this kind of forum. So thank you guys again. Thanks to the orchestrators and to my hosts.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful job to all the orchestrators. Thomas, thank you for a ton of insight in this. Um, Also, thank you to the entire board who helps organize these events. This is our first ever live stream, so we're kind of working out the kinks, and this platform seems to have worked well today. But we'll talk more about future events and how we may do them differently, and especially as
All
we're
right.
adjusting to the coronavirus season. Uh, we'll figure it out. But thank you for being with us on
Sure.
this journey. I do want to do one last plug because it's really important to support the people who are helping us. If you missed this earlier in the stream, but please do check out orchestrationonline.com, where Thomas has his brand new book, which is a great value. And we'll leave the stream up, by the way, so you can catch up with it. But if you rewind to the first quarter of what we talked about, we talked quite a bit more about the book and some things in it. So it's got a lot of stuff of value. Please do check that out. And I also mentioned on our site on scoringarts.com that we have released 6 interviews/studies, and you are free to. They're free to the community. Just sign up just hit that free tab at the top, like Raven is showing you now, and you'll have access to those. So we'd love to welcome you into this community too, and give you more resources as we're all in this weird in between downtime and figuring out careers, lives, and wellness. So, on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for being with us, and we wish you all the best. And we hope to see you at future ones of these. Stay in touch. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, David, and thanks, Thomas, for being part of this.
All right. Bye bye.